Okay, good evening everyone and welcome to this evening's meeting of Ealing Council's Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Josh Blackhead, Chair of Overview and Scrutiny, or OSC. Apologies for the slight delay in getting live on YouTube. Council's had a previous COVID briefing, so we had to wait for a few members to hear from that. Before we get to the main item on the agenda, we have a few preliminaries. Members would have received the briefing note, which is available on the meeting page of the Council's website. So item one, apologies. We have apologies from Councillor Burke, who is substituted by Councillor Steve Donnelly. So welcome, Steve, our perennial OSC substitute. There are no urgent matters that I'm aware of. Item 3 is declarations of interest. Members will have received a note from the Council's monitoring officer confirming that the advice is the same as it was at full council. So if anyone does want to raise, let me get rid of the chat so I can actually see people raising hands properly. If people do want to make a declaration at the meeting, please indicate in the using the hand function. Councillor Bell, to you first, because I saw you, and then Councillor Driscoll.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Just to give the same declaration that I gave at the full council meeting, that I am a board member of TFL. In any discussions about funding to boroughs for street space or any other funding for boroughs, I have recused myself at those TFL board meetings so that there's not a conflict of interest.
Great. Thank you. Councillor Driscoll.
Hi, I live in or close to an LTN, but I don't view it as pecuniary because I don't think it'll have an impact on the value of my home, but I just want to declare it as an interest there. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Dabrowska, and then Councillor Woodruff, I can see you waving as well. So Councillor Dabrowska and then Simon.
Thank you. As per my declaration of interest on the councillor's members' interest register, I declare an interest that I own properties in and around the LTN areas, but they're not pecuniary because I don't see any effect at this stage. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Simon. And then we've got more and more coming. Sarah, Gareth, and then Dan. So Simon, Sarah, Gareth, Dan, please.
Well, I'd just like to say I did declare an interest at the council meeting, I think because I lived in Northfields, but having reread the advice from Helen Harris, I don't think I do have an interest, to be honest. Although I live in Northfields, I don't live incredibly close to any of these LTNs. So I'm kind of withdrawing that declaration of interest.
Thanks. And if members can take their hands down in the chat after making their points as well, just make it easier for me to keep track of who's still to go. So I think Sarah was next.
Thank you, Chair. So I live in an LTN area. However, I don't have I don't believe it's a pecuniary interest, but I just wanted to declare that at the beginning of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Gareth, and then Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Like Councillor Woodruff, I live nearby, and the impacted don't directly live within one. And like all the other councillors, I don't believe there's a pecuniary interest in it at all. So.
Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's the same declaration that I made at the council meeting. I live near to an LTN, but I don't own my property. Therefore, I don't consider it to be a pecuniary interest, but I think it's appropriate that it's declared, and that is consistent with the declaration that's on the council's website in regards to where I live. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I can't see anyone else, so we will move on. We have no matters to be considered in private, which is always good. So can I ask whether the minutes of the October meeting are agreed? People are nodding. No one
Happy
is.
to agree with you.
Yeah.
I was going to say no one is unmuting to object, but that was unmuting to agree. So I will accept that one. Fantastic. So we move on to item 6, COVID emergency transport measures. Can I first of all just thank everyone who has written to me and members of the committee with their views, particularly on low traffic neighbourhoods. I've not been able to respond to every single one on top of everything else, but please be assured, if you have written, your views have been noted, and I'm sure they will be helping to inform members' questions and the discussions this evening. We are joined by Councillor Julian Bell, Leader of the Council and Portfolio Holder for Transport, Councillor Jasbir Anand, Cabinet Member for Environment and Climate Action, and we have a number of officers from both Transport and Highways who will be helping answer questions. The report does cover the entire spread of the Council's measures, so to make sure we don't miss anything, what I'm going to do is break our discussion down into 4 main areas. So we'll start with just the background and the funding and process generally, as the report does, cycle schemes, school streets, and then we'll move on to low traffic neighbourhoods. So I'll ask Councillor Bell and others to introduce each of those sections in turn. We'll have questions and discussion on each of those sections, and then we'll move on to the next section. We do have 2 members of the public with us to speak on the LTNs section, and I'll be asking them, Lorna O'Driscoll from One Ealing and Mark Eccleston from Better Streets Ealing or Better Ealing Streets. And I'll ask them to make their contributions after the introduction to the LTNs part, so that Cabinet members and officers can respond and members can pick up any issues they raise in questions and discussion. So Councillor Bell, you were going to kick us off and introduce the background and the process for emergency transport measures.
Thank you very much, Josh, and good evening, everybody. Can I first put on record my thanks to Councillor Sabiers, who was the Cabinet Member for Environment and Highways, and was very much involved, obviously, in work up to November when he moved and Councillor Anand took over. So welcome to Councillor Anand as well. Can I also reiterate what you've just said about thanking people for writing to us and giving us their views? I've been reading all of those as they've come in, and there have been a number, but it's important that people do know that we do receive them, we do read them, we reflect on them, and encourage further responses and consultation. I'm grateful for all those who've used the Council's commonplace platform to make give us feedback and give us their views as well. So that's been really helpful. It feels a very long time ago when we were back in the first wave lockdown, and we were enjoying streets that were pretty much empty, and we had in certain parts of the borough up to 30% reductions in the nitrogen dioxide levels in our air that caused so many premature deaths in our borough and the capital. So in order to kind of try to move forward that one silver lining and positive of the lockdown, of more cycling and walking that took place, better air quality, and to also stop a car-led recovery out of COVID, where there was going to be restrictions on the amount of space on our public transport because of social distancing to stop the spread of the virus. The Secretary of State, Grant Shapps, on the 11th of May made an announcement that there would be this active travel funding. And he clearly said the government therefore expects local authorities to make significant changes to their road layouts to give more space to cyclists and pedestrians. Such changes will help embed altered behaviours and demonstrate the positive effects of active travel. This was then followed up by London through TfL and the Mayor for London setting up the London Street Space programme, and they were essentially using funding that came from the government for this active travel response to COVID, and we were able to bid for funds that came through the London Street Space schemes, but also two other funds. There was also a DFT Emergency Active Travel Fund. We got 100k, which we used for temporary cycle lanes, and then MHCLG had a Reopening the High Streets Fund, which we were able to use for some of the town centre pavement widening schemes that we had. We were very, very keen to be as open and transparent about what we were doing. So we had a June cabinet meeting, which included a long list of schemes. That long list, we kind of asked all councillors to add potential schemes to that long list. And many councillors did come forward at that point and give us additional possible schemes going forward. That long list was refined by officers in consultation with myself and Councillor Sabiers, and then officers applied for funding to both TfL and DFT. The first scheme that was implemented was on the 27th of May on the Greenford Road. We had a cycle scheme there using DFT funding. Altogether, we've had 28 schemes using the London Street Space funding, in addition to that one with DFT funding, plus a further 12 schemes, 11 footway and one complete cycle scheme using the Emergency Active Travel Fund and the Reopening the High Streets Fund. So many of you will have seen the footway widening schemes. I wouldn't say they were unsuccessful. Sometimes they weren't used as much as we would like. Some worked better than others. And sometimes the barriers got moved aside, and that was always a problem that we kept having to change them and put them back. Cycle schemes proving popular with cyclists, and anecdotally we've seen more levels of cycling, and we're going to do some more full monitoring of that in the new year. We've got 14 school streets, and they're proving popular with schools. A few issues raised, which we may well get to when we get to questions. And then we come on to LTNs. They have been controversial. There has been some strong views, both for and against, and certainly we are very cognizant of that. You will know that we've now published our interim assessment of the LTNs, which is due to be discussed at our cabinet meeting next Tuesday, and that cabinet report is in the public domain. So if there are questions about that, we're very happy to try and answer any questions on that too. But I'll end at that point, Chair.
Thanks, Julian. So if there are any questions on the background, the funding streams, and the kind of the ETO part of the report before we get into the detail of some of the schemes, Dan, I think your hand was still up from last time, so I'm going to skip straight to Councillor Ball.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so two questions on this section about the allocations and so on. First thing is, why is it that the LTNs themselves and also the long list of other schemes that we looked at seem to be largely in areas that that TfL had identified as low or moderate expectation of traffic growth? So what was the thinking of choosing these locations, seeing as they don't seem to comply, they don't seem to correspond with the areas that were expected to have the highest growth due to the COVID issues? And then the other one is, could you say something about the recent second round of funding? I understand from officers previously that additional schemes weren't being worked up, but can you confirm, did we apply for anything in the second round that's just closed, or nothing at all? If we did apply for anything, what is it? Thanks.
John, just in terms of the first part on why those specific ones chosen, let's come to that under the LTN part, because I'm sure that's going to be something we can discuss at length. Juliet, do you want to say something about tranche 2 funding at this stage?
Yeah, happy to. And on that first question, though, there is a section in the Cabinet report which addresses this, and so I'd refer people to that. In terms of tranche 2 funding, yes, we did apply for tranche 2 funding, and there are 5 potential LTNs that we would look to implement. We haven't as yet confirmed to TfL that we're going to go ahead with those, because we want to have consultation with ward councillors before we do that, but that will happen imminently. And certainly tranche 2, the government have changed the guidance. They were very clear in the first round of funding for LTNs, and I would say that there are, in the second tranche, there are also cycle schemes and as well, and the bulk of the second tranche money is actually for cycle schemes rather than LTNs. But in the first tranche, the government was very clear that we had to put these in very quickly, and that we also and TfL also wanted them implemented by the end of September. Now that subsequently changed, but when we set off implementing that first round of LTNs, we were clearly told that the end of September they had to be in by. So we had very little time to do normal consultation that we would do in any new traffic measures that we were looking to bring in. So we used the experimental traffic orders in order to have a continuous 6-month live consultation, if you like. But we will do it different on tranche 2. The government are now clearly saying that we need to have more consultation before implementation. Now, what that will be, I as yet I can't say, but certainly we would have in tranche 1 wanted to do more consultation than the 7 days before implementation that we did, but we were unable to because of the conditions that were attached to the funding from DfT.
Can I come back on that quickly?
Yeah, I was going to say, you've unmuted already. I don't want to get too bogged down on LTNs right now, because I know we're going to have a broader discussion about them a little bit later. So
it's a follow up on the new ones which aren't in the report.
Sure.
Yeah. So are the 5 new ones from the original long list, or are they brand new schemes, and where are they?
They are from the original long list, and we'll when we get to the point where we can tell people where they are, we will, and it won't be too long, John.
Okay, Councillor Dabrowska.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions that arose from what you were just saying with regards to the funding of the active travel schemes. In this paper and in the Cabinet paper, it just talks about the funding received and certain costs. What is the actual cost of all the active travel schemes out of the funding that you received? Because in the report you received 1.1 million for the schemes. How much of that has been spent? I'm not looking at the Cabinet paper in terms of the extra cost like vandalism, but the actual outset of planned schemes. And my second question is, you mentioned in your speech monitoring cycling uptake. Who will you be consulting with, and how will you be monitoring that there has been an uptake in cycling? Because unless you do a physical count on the road and catch people saying, are you a new cyclist? How are you going to capture that information? Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll bring officers in a minute, but in terms of the amount of funding that we have spent, so you're right, we got the 1.1 million. We're still in the process of implementing, but given there's been a change in emphasis when we first started, and sorry, Chair, I'm going to talk about LTNs again. There was a focus on barriers and concrete barriers, actually, rather than planters and bollards. And now we're moving towards not having bollards but having cameras, and they are more expensive. So again, in the cabinet report, it's clear that the funding that we had doesn't cover all of the expenditure, but we have some local implementation funding from TfL, which is now being renewed again. We lost it for the first half of the year, what TfL called H1, half one funding. There was no LIP funding there. We just got the street space funding. Now in H2, we have got potentially the second tranche of street space funding, plus we have got some local implementation plan funding, but that's in the finance section of the cabinet report. And again, I'll ask officers if they want to add anything to that, and also talk about how we will monitor the uptake of cycling in the new year.
Hello, this is Chris Cole. I'm the Transport Planning Service Manager for the Council. I'd also like to apologise for my extremely croaky voice. I seem to have gone down with some sort of lurgy. In terms of the monitoring, Councillor Dabrowska, we do have a number of permanent cycle count locations which count cyclists throughout the year. We'll also be using some specific counts for in and around the locations where counts have been put in. At this stage, we won't specifically go for the kind of halfway stage, interim assessment, if you would like. We weren't necessarily planning to do some surveys in terms of directly stopping people, but we will look to try and do some further qualitative assessments for the final reports for the scheme.
Thanks, Chris.
If I may just follow up, just a sub question to that last one. Just a simple request.
Yeah, go ahead.
If Chris Cole could provide the councillors locations of these monitoring locations for both cyclists and vehicles, that'd be great. Thank you.
No problem.
I'm sure Chris can circulate a list of where these sites are. Deirdre, I've got you waiting, but just before we do, Julian, you said we'd got the 1 point however many millions of the 45 that was allocated to TfL. I suppose from this committee's point of view, I mean, it would be useful to know how much we had bid for in total. Did we get all of the money that we bid for? Did we get 50%? How successful were we? Given that 1 point something isn't 1/32 of the 45 million. So if it was purely on a borough by borough basis, it looks like we're under successful.
Yeah, Chris can tell me if my memory's failing me, but I think we bid for about 1.5 million and we got the 1.1 million. But you can correct me if my memory's playing tricks with me, Chris.
I'm just looking up that number. I'll be back in 1 minute. Give me 1 second to look it up.
Thanks. Deirdre, do you want to ask a question while Chris is off looking through his emails and things?
Sure. Thanks very much, Chair. It was just a very brief one. I know there's been some questions about LTN, so I won't go into any of that because I understand we are going to deal with that in full later. So I'll hold back all my questions on that one. But it really is just about something that is very local to me as a local councillor for North Hope Mandeville. And there is one scheme which is in the beginning of the report, which is the road closure at a Little Church Road. And I think it comes under, it's kind of name checked under the road widening schemes, and it's mentioned on page 21 of the report, because originally it was sort of two-part. So there was an extension of the footway on Ealing Road and the closure of Little Church Road. So the extension of the footway was removed for the reasons that the leaders outlined, but the closure is still in place. And I have a worry that it's kind of been forgotten about a little bit by the council, because it's never mentioned when we talk about reviews, and it's not kind of detailed in this report tonight. It's just mentioned on that page and we don't look at it again. So I just want sort of assurances, either from the leader or from officers, as to what the plan is to review that road closure, because I'm just not clear what our plan is on that. And I know the ETO is apparently up on the 4th of January. So I just want to understand, if the ETO is up on the 4th of January and we haven't reviewed anything, do we have to remove that road closure? I'm not quite sure how it works, because I have residents asking me, what is going to happen after the ETO is up? So is there a timetable? Do we know what's happening with that? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Deirdre. So my understanding is, and again, Chris can tell me if I've got this wrong, but I'm pretty certain that our plan is to review all of the walking and cycling schemes in a report that will come to January Cabinet. And so your particular road closure there in Northolt would be included in that review, in that, and that's when the 6-month period and the ETOs are ended for that particular one, and that will be the review.
Chris, have we got an answer on the?
So the answer to the first one is, how much did we bid for? It was 1.89 million that we actually bid for. And as Councillor Bell says, we got 1.1. I think there was a comment saying, compared to some other schemes, other boroughs, apologies, some boroughs got quite large amounts for specific cycle schemes that TfL had already planned. So therefore that does skew the figures, and it does mean like for like comparison isn't perhaps the fairest way of viewing it, because basically there were some schemes that were always going to get funding and the boroughs didn't actually apply for them. It was TfL doing it through the borough. In terms of the monitoring of cycling and walking and school streets, yes, that's going to be something that we'll bring to Cabinet in the new year.
Great, thank you. I don't think there are any more questions at this point. So I think we can probably move on to the cycle schemes. So Councillor Bell, did you want to introduce anything on the cycle schemes, or move straight to questions?
To be honest, it's probably best to just move straight to questions. They're there. We're still going to implement more, because we've not implemented all of them. There's one. The main focus has always been on the Uxbridge Road. And we've had the Make Uxbridge Road Safer for Cycling campaign, and certainly making Uxbridge Road safe for cyclists was a long-term plan. And so being able to use this streets-based funding to do some temporary cycle lanes, mainly on the Uxbridge Road, but some others as well, it seemed a very, very good opportunity. There were some issues around the Iron Bridge in Southall, with some additional use of space for the cycle lane that needed to be looked at more closely. So that hasn't started yet, but we're looking to implement that soon. So yeah, it's a positive scheme, which ultimately people, I'm a regular cyclist, and when I speak to, and you will know yourself, when you speak to people about why they don't cycle, it is always that fear of accidents and danger from accompanying road traffic on the roads. And so even if you have light segregation, which many of these cycle lanes are, they're just the ones, it does actually make it safer cyclists, both literally and figuratively in cyclists' minds as well. And that's the thing, we need to give people confidence to cycle more.
Okay, so we've got questions from Councillor Crawford.
Sorry, did you want me to go now, Chair?
Yeah, your hand's at the top of the list, Dan.
Thank you. I'll make the most of this opportunity then. So I think Councillor Bell has already answered part of my question, which was going to be asking for updates on some of those schemes that are signposted as forthcoming, if you like, but we aren't quite there. Could he? Are those the schemes he's referenced the only ones in that sort of space at the moment? So are there more? And could he give an overview of how he feels we're doing with regards to our own ambitious plans on cycling as a council, and whether he feels there's more that we need to do? Thank you.
Okay, Julian.
So there are other schemes so I haven't actually been on Acton High Street for a little while, but my understanding is that section of the Uxbridge Road is one where we've still got work to do to put more temporary cycle lanes in. There's a kind of north-south cycle lane from Fisher's Lane in the south all the way up to eventually it will get to Old Oak, and that's quite a substantial cycle scheme that we'll initially put in with temporary materials, but would actually like to make it permanent and more substantive as we go forward. And that's one of the opportunities of the tranche 2 funding for the cycle schemes, in that TfL are looking for us to try to make them more long term. And just one other point I'd make is that we haven't got everything right, and certainly the kind of plastic high vis orange ones have been too susceptible to being just knocked out by passing traffic. If they just clip it, then they come out and you find them in the gutter, and we keep going back and putting them back in again. But my understanding is, and again officers can reiterate this, is that we've got a different temporary cycle lane wand that is a bit more robust, and is also a collapsible one. So the fire brigade will find it useful in that they'll be able to drive over it to get to a fire hydrant, and after they've driven over it, it'll just pop back up again. That's my understanding.
The new ones going on Acton High Street, and some around towards Ealing Common are the black ones, which I suppose are those ones.
Yeah.
My daughter calls them magic ones because she doesn't get so close to the traffic when she's on the back of my bike. I don't think there was anything that officers needed to come back on that. So, Councillor Ball.
Thank you. So one of the schemes is the Fisher's Lane one. When that was being worked up, was the discussion with Hounslow officers about the Turnham Green Terrace measures as well? Because the combination of the two together has caused a lot of difficulties for people in that southeast corner of our borough to drive in any journey that involves heading south. So what did that consultation happen? And then one other question, unrelated. I mean, I think I would welcome the segregated cycle lane along the Uxbridge Road, but clearly a large proportion of the accidents involving cyclists on the Uxbridge Road happen at the junctions, and isn't the LTN diverting traffic around the LTN by going onto the Uxbridge Road and off it again? Isn't that generating more danger for cyclists at those junctions, and so kind of operating in a counter direction to the helpful work that the Uxbridge Road cycle lane is doing.
So I can assure you that that conversation did take place between Ealing and Hounslow officers around Fisher's Lane and Turnham Green Terrace, and it was also a conversation that I had and Councillor Sabies had with officers. We were informed and discussed it on a number of occasions that it was clear that the two roads were closely aligned to each other, and if you did something with one, you would have to do something with the other as well. And so, yeah, we were clear that we had to work as one with Hounslow on that. So that's what happened. In terms of junctions, clearly, I think the challenge we've got is that to do works at junctions is more substantive and requires more permanent materials. And yes, I agree with you that the majority of accidents with cyclists happen at junctions, and the lesson for any cyclist is to keep well away from big lorries at junctions, especially because that's where 60% of fatalities occur. So we do fully recognise the importance of improving junctions, and again, that's one of the kind of guidance notes that TfL have given us in terms of the tranche 2 funding, to look to see what improvements can be made around junctions as well, not just putting in the temporary lightly segregated lanes.
Councillor Shaw, I'm gonna do to you what I did to Councillor Costigan, and just follow up on that, if that's all right, making you wait, Gareth.
Yeah, no problem, Chair. Yeah.
The question, I suppose, the follow-up from that discussion about junctions is then about making schemes permanent. And obviously, you keep using the temporary word for the ones, and they are. What does a permanent scheme look like for this? Because the danger is we introduce lots of new cyclists by providing the infrastructure that, as you rightly say, encourages it. We then end up at the end of the funding with no more funding to replace ones that get knocked over or damaged, and junctions that haven't been upgraded. And I know there's a lot of work to be done with TfL for adding the advanced stoplight, the advanced lights that we have at Ealing Common, and that all those improvements that make a junction safe for cycling. And then we suddenly have to take it all away, or we get those dangerous junctions. So what does a permanent scheme look like, and where's the money coming from, the substantial amount? Because I know we did with the Mini Holland funding, some of the Uxbridge Road, and we then couldn't do the next phase because we didn't have the funding. So what does permanency look like, and how do we get there? I think you're muted, Julian.
Sorry. the phrase of the pandemic. You're muted. So yeah, the cycle lanes that run alongside Ealing Common on the Uxbridge Road, which are actually for the most part off-road, but segregated for cyclists from pedestrians, I would say are probably the ideal, in that that's kind of permanent infrastructure, and it's separated very clearly from road traffic and from pedestrians. Now, that actual kind of 1 kilometre of cycle lanes on either side of the Uxbridge Road cost about £1 million. So it is extremely expensive to do that. Now, we've got the light segregation with the ones at the moment. You can have somewhere in between what I've just said is the ideal and the current light with armadillos and having more substantive segregation on a cycle lane. But I'm happy to let officers come in and add anything to that, because I know we've talked an awful lot about that's often the problem you've got on Uxbridge Road is that there's limited road space and you can only do so much, and that limits the amount of segregation that you can sometimes put in.
Chris, Tony, was there anything to add from the Chris? I think you've unmuted.
Yeah, I was just going to say that there has been a project which has already started work on the Uxbridge Road, and that is continuing. And we don't actually know exactly when funding will come forward. I think, as everyone is aware, TfL are kind of living on 6-month kind of agreements with DFT. There will be other funding pots coming forward, but I think, as Councillor Bella, is it going to be extremely expensive to do things all at once? Having said that, we are looking at the new ones which are a little bit more flexible, should last a little bit longer. So we're not intending to just take them away. I think that's probably important to stress. But we do need to work on how the transition from that will work, and it is dependent on funding, and we'll just have to kind of wait and see how transport funding in general just kind of comes to the council, because at the moment it's still a little bit up in the air. It's a bit unfortunate, but yeah, that's just the situation we're in.
Councillor Shaw, thank you for your patience. We'll take you, and then we'll move on to school streets.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was just thinking more about the sort of the holistic approach of encouraging cycling. And I know, sort of cycle storage is a particular issue. It's something that, residents are often contacting me about, things like the bike hanger scheme that we've had and so on. And even, things like planning permission for storage in front gardens and so on, that, people storing bikes in their front gardens in the past have been told to remove temporary storage structures or a small shed, perhaps only about 5 foot by 4 foot or so, for cycle storage. And I know these are slightly different issues, but in terms of encouraging cycling with all this, if we're going to get residents in the borough cycling, these are things we need to consider as well. So although the funding might not be there directly from TfL, I'm more thinking for officers, what can we do about encouraging more of these more of the infrastructure that's needed to encourage cycling, whether that's bike hangers on pavements or more bike hangers on streets. I mean, I'm sure we'll discuss this further when we get to the low traffic neighbourhoods, but certainly in the one sort of that affects one of my wards in West Ealing South, I think, it's a very large low traffic neighbourhood with only about 5 or 6 bike hangers within it entirely. Now that's sort of prohibiting people keeping cycles safely, particularly where they're living in converted houses and things like that. They don't want to be taking the bike up and downstairs. So, how are we looking at this as a whole approach and not just on the funding that we're purely getting for specific schemes?
So unfortunately, Councillor Shaw, the street space COVID's active travel funding didn't include cycle parking. I lobbied quite often and vociferously that it should include some funding for cycle parking, but we never quite got over the line on that one. We did manage to get some funding for cycle training, which wasn't originally included in this active travel COVID funding. So it comes back to the long-term local implementation plan funding that we get, which has now been reinstated. And I know that we have got plans to use some of that funding for more cycle parking.
I suppose there was the point about the planning permission for bike parking in your front gardens, isn't there? So I don't know if you can answer that, or Chris, or someone can come in on what the policy is.
It's a bugbear of mine that we haven't managed to kind of sort that one out and have a planning policy guideline for residents to be able to put some kind of small cycle parking structures in their front gardens. You can put one in your back garden, and that's not an issue. But I don't know if Chris wants to say anything more about that.
No, I think you kind of summed up. It is a planning issue rather than a transport issue. I believe that it counts as a structure, and there are now I say I'm a transport planner, not a planner, and therefore I'm straying into areas that I'm not an expert in. So I think I should probably leave it at that. Just to say it is a planning issue.
Okay, thanks. Well, I mean,
I will take you up though, Councillor Blacker, with planning officers again. It's a perennial thing that I complain to them about, and so I'll have another go.
Well, I think we are reviewing. Sorry, Gareth.
Yeah, I was just going to say perhaps it's something we could pick up in the sort of the drafting and the meetings that we're having towards the local plan, and drafting the new local plan. That was something that we were in committee with last night, but perhaps it's something that I can raise there and take up.
Yeah, I was again going to say that we could recommend that there is some movement on the local plan on that. But I think your point, Gareth, about the additional infrastructure and parking on street for cycling is probably an important one. Certainly, living in a flat, it isn't easy to own a bicycle, and getting that down the stairs. So, and I know people have asked me for them. So I don't know if we probably will want to recommend that the council look at those holistic measures, but we can talk about that at the end. If we move on to school streets, I've lost Julian's video. There he is. Sorry, people's videos keep shifting around on my screen, so I lose you, and I thought we'd lost you entirely.
Yeah, I was going to ask Councillor Anand to introduce this one and take questions on it.
Great, Councillor Jasbir Anand.
Thank you, Chair. We all know that school streets were also identified as the vital component of the COVID recovery by supporting government recommendations to use the active travel to schools. School streets are low traffic. They're not no traffic schemes, but there's certain vehicles are exempt from the closure, and residents can access their school streets that they actually live in. There are 10 operational school schemes, 2 which will also start in January. All permits are free of charge and are available for residents within the school streets. Exemptions include the blue badge holders, carers, and of course residents within the area, and any transport services for SEN children being collected from properties and being taken to the school, plus emergency vehicles and emergency trade services. So the only scheme that is not part of the London Street Place plans is in Perivale, and that is the permanent scheme, which has 2 fixed cameras near the schools, the 2 schools which are close to each other. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Great, thank you, Jasbir. I've got John and Gareth's legacy hands. So if John and Gareth do want to ask questions, feel free. But until then, if there is anyone else, please indicate. Councillor Costigan.
Thanks, Chair. Just a very quick one, Councillor Anand. I'm just wondering about displacement. I don't quite know how they work. I know there's one in my ward and I've seen pictures but haven't been down to it. But are we at all worried, or are we looking into whether it will be the displacement to surrounding roads, or how are we looking at that?
Chair, do you want me to come back?
Yeah, sorry, Jasbir. I don't know if you caught that, because Deirdre, you were very quiet there, but...
So is it
I don't know. So it's about displacement, Councillor Anand. So whether the people will park in the surrounding areas, and if there's been any issues around that.
No, Chair, there haven't been any issues around the other roads which are in the vicinity of the school streets programme. There haven't been any issues. People have been really supportive, and schools have volunteers working with the temporary gates up. And I think everybody understands the process of why we're trying to do this. So there hasn't been a huge impact on the neighbouring roads at all.
Thank you. Councillor Crawford. Dan.
Sorry, Chair, I was on mute, and you also surprised me by coming to me quicker than I expected. Mine is not really a question. It's more that I wanted to place on record the sterling work of some of my constituents in terms of setting up the Don't Water primary school street scheme, which is something that they've been trying to do, and I know Councillor Bell knows this as well, and Councillor Rooney, for the best part of a decade, to try and bring parents and local residents along with the idea that it's not necessary for local people to drive and park dangerously near the school. And there was a little bit of concern initially about getting enough people to support that in terms of being stewards, but it seems to be working very well. And I wanted to commend the parents, students and teachers at the school for their hard work, as well as our officers, of course. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. You're right, absolutely right. It's a massive community effort, and I think we should thank everyone who stepped up to help these run effectively. Councillor Shaw.
Yeah, if I could just quickly
add. Sorry, Jasper. Yes.
Sorry, no. Just to say that we agree that the parking may have caused some problems in the first few weeks when we've introduced the program, but parents are beginning to be more considerate, more supportive, and are now walking more for their children to school. So it's a win-win situation.
Great. Gareth.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, again, I welcome these school streets, and it's a very good initiative. What I do just sort of note is that obviously we've got a relatively small number compared to the total number of primary schools that we have in the borough at the moment. So there are some barriers for the schools to be running these. Obviously, we've mentioned, and great thanks to those who are volunteering their time and so on. So I'm just wondering how we think we can actually encourage more schools to be engaged and to take it up.
We are, sorry, Chair, I'm jumping the gun. I didn't wait for you to call me in. Chair, we are working with some primary schools at this stage, and also would like to work with other high schools as well to see if we can implement this further. But it is how the schools will further engage with us. The difficulty sometimes is if schools are not engaging back on this scheme, then we'll come to a dead end. But I think it's about going out and then using these examples where we find that this is materialized really well. I think we need to push a bit more. Officers might want to push schools a bit more and to join this scheme. I think there is a lot of work that we can do, but can be very positive. We can get schools to engage with us.
Thank you. And Councillor Driscoll.
Thank you, Chair. Slightly to build on what Councillor Shaw was saying there, that there's a primary school in my ward in Northfields that had an expression of interest, but then withdrew, mainly because it felt it had so many competing demands at the start of the academic year, responding to COVID, and then also trying to manage the school streets. But just looking forward, will the school streets as they go forward be camera monitored? Whereas at the moment they're sort of staffed barriers, or is that how we envision them going forward? Because I think if that would encourage the schools in my ward that were hesitant to actually step forward, because then they know they've got a period of time where it might not be as sort of demanding on their resources. So I don't know, just to get a bit more about the future of school streets and how they're going to go forward. Thank you.
Great. Jasbir, but Nikki from the School Street team has also got their hand up, so I don't know if you want to just introduce them.
Can I go in first and then, is that okay, Chair?
Yeah.
Sure. We were basically asked to deliver this scheme at a very low cost. It's an experimental scheme and it's movable, it has temporary barriers. This was the chosen and effective way to deliver the scheme. If we are looking at any ANPR cameras, we're looking at over £20,000 each. And some of our school streets have more than one barrier. So the stewards normally remain with the barrier at all times. And as Councillor Driscoll said, it's about getting the volunteers to do all this. And it's like being with the barriers all the times to move it. And when access is required for the emergency vehicles and residents. The schools have submitted an expressions of interest to request support to set up streets. They're aware that they would be responsible for storing, positioning and managing the barrier restrictions. They have recruited volunteers, and some of the volunteers feel proud that they're doing a very good service, and they get to engage with people, they get to know about the issues, the problems, and they're able to interact with maybe residents and parents who are using the walking, taking children to school. We haven't really agreed that we would look at using cameras in the future, but I think it's a good way of beginning this, managing the barriers with volunteers and also working with the school. But at this stage, cameras are not on the radar as such.
Okay. Nikki, did you want to add to that?
No, Councillor Anand has said everything I needed to say beautifully. So no, that's it does just come down to cost really, as much as anything else. So the scheme that Councillor Driscoll was mentioning, they were actually needed to have 4 barriers, so that's £80,000. That doesn't include all the signage that we would need to have for that scheme. But yes, we will be looking to support more schools in future.
Great.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions on school streets before we move on? Are we all very keen to talk about low traffic neighbourhoods? Fantastic. Julian, did you want to say something by way of introduction? And then we'll move on to Lorna and Mark, and then to members' questions.
Yeah, I guess the first thing I'd say is that we've always said that this process of low traffic neighbourhoods was a dynamic one. So as the experimental traffic order progresses as we go through it, we will look to make changes to improve it. And the clue's in the name as well. It is experimental, and it may be that when we come to the end of the ETO period, that we would take an LTN out as well. So that is always an option that we would consider. I do think that flexibility as we move forward is clear, because for me, safety of our residents within LTNs is the #1 priority. So we need to, and we have substantially changed the way that the LTNs have operated, having got responses from our emergency services. So as I said earlier, initially TfL guidance was that we would put in concrete kind of planters and barriers, and that we wouldn't have bollards. But the fire brigade were very clear that that they needed to have access through some of those barriers, and that the best way to do it was bollards. So we put the bollards in. We've also had for some streets and barriers a clear indication from the London Ambulance Service that we should put cameras in instead of bollards, and when we've had that guidance from the London Ambulance Service, we've done that. If you look at the cabinet report that we're going to be discussing next week, and we'll wait to see what our decisions are, but the recommendation is that we go even further with changes that we make by removing all bollards now and putting all cameras in. We're concerned. We didn't know at the beginning of this process that the police service and the ambulance service sat navs were very complicated and got security aspects to them, and that they wouldn't be able to update where the barriers were. All of these things, as we've progressed, have meant that we can refine the process. TfL have now changed their guidance, and also are more willing for us to use the funding for cameras. That wasn't the case in the beginning. So we're looking to change things to make things better, especially the the priority of safety for residents. So that's why we're making the proposals there for Cabinet to consider next week about putting cameras in for all bollards. The other thing is we are mindful of the access issues that people with disabilities have got, and again we've been listening, and there is a proposal to Cabinet to give blue badge holders exemptions to go through cameras as well in their LTNs, and again that's showing that we are prepared to make changes and to listen.
Okay, thank you. So I said we would hear from Lorna and Mark. So Lorna Driscoll from One Ealing, I think you'll remember spoke to us at the full council meeting. Both of them I've suggested 3 to 5 minutes, hopeful that they keep it pithy and short, but also mindful they both, I'm sure, have lots to say. So Lorna, would you like to go first?
Firstly, I'd like to thank the Chair and the committee for allowing me to contribute to the discussion this evening. Today is not the time to rehash all the reasons why the current LTN scheme should not be implemented in our borough. We have already spent time making our position very clear at the last extraordinary meeting on the many reasons why they should be withdrawn. Today is about scrutinising and evaluating the performance of the Council and the facts to date ahead of the interim review. It's worth noting the report before this committee only recommends that the committee note the update provided on the COVID transport street space schemes. This is a woefully inadequate recommendation for this council decision that is clearly unprecedented in living memory and subject to a judge allowing a legal challenge take place. Before I delve into the facts that have brought us to this point, I would like to note that this scheme has been flawed from the outset. It's overly ambitious, with no clear means of measuring success or failure, with no baseline data, and at best undefined success criteria. Putting that aside for a moment, the following facts still stand still. All councillors, when expressing a view on LTNs, have categorically stated that if residents are clearly opposed after a 6-month period, the LTN should be removed. Every test of public opinion throughout the LTN period has shown an overwhelming majority against them. To give a flavour of how people feel to date, 3,000 residents marched to the town hall asking for these LTNs to be removed in September. There are over 3,000 members and growing on our Facebook page. 168 new members joined in the last week alone. Over 990 people have donated a total of £37,000 to support the High Court legal challenge so far. This is an average of £37 per person and indicative of how strongly residents feel about the way the council have acted. We are constantly told that a loud opposing minority are drowning out the supporting majority, yet every survey carried out, including the council's own consultation, shows the opposite. Commonplace survey shows 76% oppose the LTNs. 85% of emails sent to the council's traffic email address were opposed to the LTNs. 3 polls on local community sites, on average 80% are against LTNs. And 95% of residents are against the LTNs in the local Conservative group survey. To quote a statement from the 29th of August last, issued on behalf of Councillors Shaw, Conlon, Rye, Driscoll and Block, we want all residents of Wopel and Northfields wards to have their say on the schemes on an equal basis. If at the end of a 6-month trial period, the consultation results prove to be both representative of our residents as well as negative, we would support the move to remove the LTN, i.e. both the collapsible bollards and planters. Yet we still find ourselves here 6 months on, despite the overwhelming residents and their opinions and opposition to it. The council are failing to live up to that promise and instead seeking to extend the schemes for a further 6 months. Moving now to the shortcomings of this bodged process that are causing so many impacts on a real basis to people daily. Firstly, the council has just admitted it applied for funding under COVID measures for these schemes before there was a sign-off from Cabinet. Either the officer overreached or they were directed to do so by the relevant councillors, despite knowing this would be ahead of Cabinet approval and outside the approved delegated powers. Also, whilst the council consultation was not possible due to the tight timescales, the officers and councillors selectively consulted as early as May last with groups supporting the schemes, whilst ignoring any parties with concerns. One of the most shocking aspects of the Council's approach to the LTNs has been the disregard for people with protected characteristics. The well-documented impact on the elderly and disabled, and the increased pollution on boundary roads impacting BAME residents disproportionately. Allowing blue badge holders to drive through ANPR cameras does not mitigate the impact on the elderly who are dependent on carers or simply less mobile. Nor does it solve the congestion and pollution of the impact on local businesses. Finally, we are constantly told that every accommodation has been made for emergency services to ensure we are not hindered. Yet, after the admission that the LAS were not consulted, and despite Councillor Bell assuring us, we now discover that only 2 keys were given to the ambulance service in September, and that police received keys at the same time. The interim assessment recommends swapping some more bollards for ANPR cameras, but not all bollards, something all of the emergency service have been clear is their preference. The serious issues we raise this evening make it incumbent on your committee to act. We ask you to reject the recommendation of the report to note the update, and instead look to you to make a recommendation for a proper, detailed and wide-ranging review of these decisions in order to rectify the issues and seek to prevent similar deficiencies occurring again. We still face a council that would prefer to win the argument rather than do the right thing.
Lorna, thank you, and perfectly timed as well. So very many thanks for that, and thank you for that, and the kind of document you sent through earlier as well, which I hope members have had time to read because it was quite lengthy, but thank you for taking the time to put that together.
Thank
Mark,
you for listening.
From Better Ealing Streets.
Hello. My name is Mark. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me to talk to you today. I'm not a member of an organised group or political party. I don't even have a bike. I'm not in a cycling club. I'm essentially just a dad, and I've lived here in Ealing for the past 15 years. And I've got to say, I absolutely love the new LTNs, and I've got to thank you so much for what they've done for us already as a family. But I've got to say, to be honest, I wasn't convinced at the start of all this. I remember the first day the planters were installed in our street because I had to go to Wicks in South Ealing to get some grout for my bathroom. And DIY always pretty much puts me in a bad mood, and I was about to get even more grumpy because the drive took an extra 5 minutes, and on the way back I ended up having to park about 100 yards from my house on the other side of the planters, so the jury for me was definitely out. But then something really strange happened. You know, the next morning I woke up and there was this eerie silence. There was no clattering of cars over speed bumps, there was no arguments in the streets. It was absolutely blissful. I've heard people say there was no need for these LTNs in Ealing, but I can tell you my street had over 1 million vehicles a year pass through it, and many other roads have been plagued by high traffic. So anyway, for the rest of the week, we stopped using the car for short journeys and we walked through our neighbourhood, and we noticed that other people were walking as well, and they were running and they were cycling, and kids were scooting to school, and it felt like it was the neighbourhood that everyone should have. And best of all for us personally, our 15-year-old son who has autism could actually finally safely walk home on his own rather than I or his mum coming to help him across a very dangerous road. So that was good, but then of course something even more bizarre happened. The graffiti, the vandalism, the marching, the repeated claims that these LTNs were negatively affecting other people. And that, I've got to say, concerns me. You know, how could I be happy if there was general hardship from these actual schemes? So I've decided to have a look, and here we go, quickly. I can go through them. LTNs exacerbate the congestion and pollution on surrounding main roads. Well, not according to a study of 70 LTNs in 11 countries. They showed that an area-wide traffic had been reduced on average by 22%. And even if it wasn't, you know, what's this about, this argument of residential roads being a pressure valve for the traffic jams on main roads? Keep the traffic there where the infrastructure is for safety and deal with it while it's there. Okay, let's take another one here. LTNs discriminate against the elderly and disabled people as well as poorer residents. Absolute nonsense. There's some brilliant research here from Professor Rachel Aldrich from Westminster University, and she concludes no clear social equity problem is related to LTNs, which makes sense. You know, you've got to spend a lot of money to buy a car, and busy roads make it less easy for the less able to get about. Emergency services are being delayed by filters. Julian touched on this as well. There has been some teething problems, but as it stands, there's no official complaints for ambulance service or the police or the fire service. drop in high street trade, doesn't exist. People are being blockaded in their homes, absolute nonsense. You know, what's amazing about all this is that these claims seem instinctively plausible, but when you hold them up to the light of scrutiny, it's nothing that stands up. It's a smog of misinformation, and people are finally seeing through it. I agree with Lorna, communication of the scheme hasn't been great, but now it's being trialed, everyone is being consulted, or should I say nearly everyone, because you know there is one group here that isn't being consulted, and they have the most to lose, and that's children, because living in high areas of traffic is making a disproportionate impact on children's physical and mental health. Asthma, diabetes, obesity, delayed cognitive function, the studies are crystal clear here. And let me tell you, my big question is, can we really accept, as a decent society, the health problems of our kids are a fair price to pay for our freedom to drive? I don't think they are, frankly. And now, finally, the really exciting bit for me. I, like everyone, have watched the David Attenborough Extinction documentary on climate change, and I felt helpless, but here we can make a difference. If we're privileged enough...
About a minute left, Mark.
Sorry?
About a minute left.
Okay. There's a car outside our home, and all we are being asked to do is not use it so much. And if we really can't, that's fine. But if we can, there's more room on the road for people who need those essential journeys. Okay, 11,000 people have signed a petition against them, sure. But remember this, anger travels fast, it travels wide, but joy will always catch it up. This noisy protest will die down, and people will eventually love these LTNs, because this is my final point, and it is the inconvenient truth of this. We've lived with them in Ealing for decades, and nobody's suggesting pulling them out, because LTNs have created quieter, safer and better streets. So keep your nerve, keep what you're doing, because LTNs are the solution here for a greener kind of legacy that Ealing should be proud of.
Great, thank you very much, Mark, and thank you again, Lorna, for that. A lot said there. Julian, did you want to come back on any of those points now? I do have 4 councillors with their hands up, so you might want to address anything that's been said now before we move on to questions and points get missed.
Yeah, so just to be clear, the recommendation in front of Cabinet next week is to replace all bollards with cameras. So we're not talking about some bollards, we're talking about all bollards.
Okay, Councillor Rice.
Sorry, can I just ask, so we won't have any bollards anywhere in any LTN in the borough of Ealing any longer?
That's my understanding. In terms of the current LTNs that we're talking about, yes.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Julian. Councillor Rice.
Thank you. And first of all, if I can just apologise for the lack of a picture on the screen, of technical reasons why I can't work the equipment at the moment to get a picture up. So first of all, if I can just ask about part of the reason why we look into having LTNs in the first place is that we look at the statistics and we see that that over 30% of car journeys are for journeys of under 2 miles. Now, I've been challenged on this, and I perhaps would like to know a little bit more about the background for where that statistic comes from, and what it actually seems to cover, because it has been pointed out to me that someone could make a very short car journey to drop their child off to school, but then they continue to drive on to work. And so it's actually a far longer journey. So is there some way of actually getting hold of that data in order to actually study what these journeys actually are and what they refer to? And also, I'd like to very much welcome the fact that we are looking at, and we have recommended that blue badge holders should be allowed to use their own LTN area. But one thing I have been asked about is have we considered allowing blue badge holders to use all the LTN areas, as well as zero emission cars using all the LTN areas? And it has been said to me that it could actually be very easily policed. Now we have the ANPR technology, and so is that a possibility? Please, thank you.
Great, thanks. Just before you come back on that, Julian, if members can take their hands down, just for my benefit, so I don't get lost, and remember to, if everyone can remember to mute themselves once they've finished. So Julian, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I probably need to let Chris come back on the 30% of 2 mile journeys and where that study came from. I do know that applies London-wide as well as to Ealing. In terms of blue badge holders, we did look at, and we'll discuss this at Cabinet next week as well. We have looked at the possibility of giving all blue badge holders exemptions to go through LTN cameras, but there are approximately 12,000 blue badge holders in the borough, and equally, if you extend the sanctions, extend the exemptions to go through cameras to other groups, you get to the point where the kind of purpose of the low traffic neighbourhood begins to be defeated, in that you've given too many exemptions, and it becomes a medium traffic area as opposed to a low traffic area. So at the moment we've clearly said that it should be just blue badge holders within an LTN, and just relates to their cameras within their own LTN. But we've also said that we would look to give exemptions to minibuses that are taking children and adults with disabilities to some of the council's daycare services. So, like somewhere like the log cabin, I know we've had some concerns about the length that some of those children on those minibuses going to the log cabin having to have, they've got some physical challenges, and it's difficult for them to be on those buses for a long time. So we will give, if we make this decision next week, exemptions to those vehicles, like the minibuses going to the log cabin as well.
Great. Chris, did you want to just say anything about the stats on short journeys?
So the stat itself comes from strategy, and there is a I'm just desperately going through the transport strategy to find the exact it does actually state in the transport strategy where the figure comes from. I am just desperately trying to go through to find out exactly where it is, because I can't remember off the top of my head. I'll come back to you in after the next question to give you the answer.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. Councillor Dubrovska.
Thank you. I've got a few questions, if I may ask. I'll ask backwards. Councillor Bell was talking about giving exemptions to blue badge holders. I will declare sort of interest. Both my parents have blue badges, so just want to declare that just in case. Blue badges are assigned to the person, not to a vehicle. So how will that be enforced, rather than sort of post entry into an LTN and then getting a ticket and then challenging it every single time one goes through an NPR, when blue badge holders are not necessarily car users, for example? So I'd like some clarification on that. With regards to the aim of LTNs within Ealing, what is the administration seeking in terms of having a net traffic evaporation? What is the aim to have in Ealing, like a realistic net traffic evaporation? Also, what is the criteria of the council's LTN policy? It was mentioned that if enough residents who are consulted during and after the LTN, what is the tipping point? What does success or failure mean? Is it 50%, or what is that criteria that the council will be using to decide whether an LTN is successful or not? And also,
this is question number 4, Joanna.
Sorry?
Question number 4. I'm sure you want
number 4. It's a simple one. With regards to putting cameras instead of bollards, what was mentioned earlier, in the report it just says some, and so it doesn't actually say in the report that all bollards will be replaced, unless I've missed something with a comma somewhere. So I'd like to just be pointed to in the report where that says, especially if we're just noting it rather than recommending what's in it. Who's paying and how much will that cost to do that replacement of all, as Councillor Bell said, of all bollards? Thank you.
So I think there's actually 5 questions in there in the end, Gillian. But if we can go through them.
Yeah, I'll whiz through them. So Councillor Broschke talked about blue badges being assigned to a person. That is absolutely correct. Some other boroughs are already doing this, and basically residents with blue badges will have to contact the council and register a preferred vehicle that they would use. They can't do multiple vehicles, but they would register a vehicle that would then be recognised, its registration number, when it goes through the ANPR cameras. So that's how it works. It's successfully working in other boroughs as well. What's the council's net traffic evaporation goal? I don't know. Clearly, we would we do want to see a modal shift, and we do want to see people taking more journeys, either walking or cycling, rather than these short journeys by car. We heard earlier that 22% traffic evaporation has happened in some cities across the world that have done this. 15% is the figure that Waltham Forest talk about. I don't want to put a figure to it, because I think that's every place is unique and different, and so I wouldn't want to compare us to somewhere else. But clearly, we want to see that reduction in car journeys, and there to be some mode shift. In terms of what are kind of criteria for deciding whether low traffic neighbours are successful or not, or what's the tipping point, I think Councillor Broschke said, and is it that 50% of the residents are in favour of them, or are 50% against them, will scrap them. I've been very clear that we won't be making the decision in the way that you would decide a referendum. This is not a referendum. Obviously, what the feedback we get from residents is important, but equally, we will want to look at the congestion data. We'll want to look at the air quality data. We'll want to look at the take-up of walking and cycling. And there's a whole range of things which, again, quite in detail laid out in the Cabinet report, the interim assessment that we've done. So it's all there for Councillor Broschke to have a look at.
Mrs. Councillor Bell, can I just ask one thing on that?
If we could just finish let Councillor Bell finish, because he's still got the question about bollards as well, and I'm sure members will be following up on the criteria.
Yeah, so in terms of bollards, Chair, I've made a very clear statement, but we will make that decision on Tuesday next week, and if we have to give the clarity that I've given tonight next Tuesday and put that in the recommendations to make it absolutely crystal clear, then we will do that. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Anand, you wanted to follow up on that?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add that with all the consultation going on, and this has brought us to the interim assessment, and we've identified those changes, and I think it's about making sure that we look through those issues and try and resolve those issues, and we've done that, and we're trying to do that by exactly the disabled badge exemption, which requires a change to the LTN, and we're doing that, and I think we have to give it some time. And also the Commonplace webpage has a substantial amount of contribution going on from our residents. They've got a lot of complaints. There are a lot of people who are in favour of this. I think, as Julian said, it's not a referendum, but it is a consultation. And we will carry on consulting and also try and amend things where there is a possibility, as now we're replacing all our bollards with cameras. And this is a best way forward at this stage. And that's also supporting the ambulance service. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thanks. Joanna, I've seen you want to follow up on the blue badge. I do have a number of members waiting, so I'm going to move on.
Okay, it's just resolution of that initiative.
Joanna, it may well get asked by another member.
Okay.
So, Councillor Ball.
Thank you, Chair. So first question is the one that I tried to ask earlier on, and then it got jumped into this part of the meeting about the criteria for choosing them in the first place. I've had a look at the Cabinet report, and it goes through in general terms what the criteria are, but it doesn't explain why it is that there is this mismatch between, as the one Ealing letter that we've been circulated showed quite clearly, a map of the areas that TfL expect to have the largest COVID-related traffic increase, and the map of the LTNs, and there's very little correlation between the two. So why is that? Is that lobbying from particular interest groups to have LTNs in particular areas? Because it doesn't say why don't they correlate? Second question is, yeah, there was a resident on social media last night who had an appointment for her child, medical appointment this morning, and was kind of looking for advice on how to get to it. It was a difficult journey to do by public transport. The consensus was to, leave an hour and a half early to make sure that you get there, because now that with the LTNs, you've got an idea how long things will take. I mean, what can be done about these sorts of situations? Because I mean, yes, I can see that you are addressing concerns of disabled people, but there are a lot of other people who have situations where they do need to drive for particular things and need to be in a particular place at a particular time, and the LTNs are having a huge effect on the reliability of the time for people to drive to places. Third one is, yeah, the Waltham Forest comparison. When we went into this initially, we were told about what a marvellous success Waltham Forest was, how popular the LTNs there, it was all great. But now we see that the traffic evaporation that was talked about, the 16% of people who were surveyed in Waltham Forest ended up driving more, 15% ended up driving less. So that's a 1% reduction. It's a very, very marginal difference. And this is with considerably smaller schemes. So the main Waltham Forest scheme is only, I believe, about a quarter of the size of LTN 21. So it's a very different situation. Some of the LTNs we have here are enormous, and different considerations apply to the smaller ones. And then finally, fourth question, final one for me, is people have been stuck in traffic for very long periods when there have been other problems like roadworks or accidents. What can we do to avoid the situation that because of the LTNs, there isn't the diversity in the road network to cope when there's one problem in the South Ealing Road roadworks or an accident on the Exbridge Road, everything grinds to a halt because the normal alternative routes that traffic would take aren't available. What can be done about that situation? Thank you.
Thank you, John. If members are mindful that if everyone asks 4 or 5 questions, we might be here all night. And if people can focus on their most important ones, if there is time at the end, we can get back to other ones. But if we can, to be mindful that everyone asking lots of questions will lead to a very long meeting indeed. So Councillor Bell, criteria for choosing, what can be done about difficult journeys? Is the Waltham Forest comparison a true one? And where does traffic go when it can't go down main roads because of accidents and roadworks?
Yeah, so in terms of criteria for choosing, as I've said before, there was guidance given by TfL, and that's all in the cabinet report for next week. There was the map which was looking at predicted levels of increased traffic post COVID, and there are different low, medium, and high, I think, levels of additional traffic. But what I think people need to know is that even where that map talks about low increases in traffic, that's still quite significant increases in traffic. But the criteria for choosing was on a number of grounds, not just that particular map. So, you know, some areas by their geography and their road layout are more suitable for low traffic neighborhoods, and an LTN 21, although it's a quite large one, is one of those areas that is suitable by its road layout for an LTN. Longer journey times. Again, if you look at the cabinet report for next week, it does say it's kind of too early to say what the kind of consequences are in terms of increased volumes of traffic and also increased congestion, and whether you can ascribe that to LTNs. I think the jury's still out on that. You know, clearly we do recognise that the changes will mean sometimes that people have their journeys will take longer, certainly to get out of an LTN, and clearly I think also we do recognise that there is a potential for increased traffic on boundary roads because of LTNs, but I don't think we've got evidence to suggest that that's the case, that it is LTNs that's causing that. In terms of Waltham Forest, my understanding is that their low traffic neighbourhoods are of an equivalent scale to the larger ones that we've got as well. And certainly speaking with residents and councillors from Waltham Forest, that there is certainly very, very positive feedback in terms of the livability of the neighbourhoods that have got LTNs, and also a decrease in the amount of nitrogen dioxide and air pollution as well, because it's not just reductions of congestion and traffic, it's also about improving air quality, and there's a clear dividend, so and it's one that's clear. In terms of traffic gridlock being caused by other things, I think this is really important. So we all know that the Pope's Lane, South Ealing, Little Ealing Lane junction has been plagued by gasworks for a very long time. Those gasworks on the South Ealing Road, and to suggest that some of the congestion that's come about as a result of that is all LTN related is just not true. You know, yesterday I was out and about in the borough, and I specifically went along Boston Road and towards Lower Boston Road going north, and there was a temporary traffic light due to some water works that were going on there. There was another temporary traffic light in West Ealing as well, both causing significant amounts of congestion, but nothing to do with LTNs. So now whether you can then go from saying that you must take away the LTNs in order to allow that traffic that's built up because of roadworks. I think that's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We've got to find a way to reduce car use across the board, whether it's within LTNs, whether it's on boundary roads, or as a result of roadworks and things. And we've got to get people to have a mode shift and start to walk and cycle more. These bigger issues of climate emergency, air quality, and the crisis, obesity crisis, and lack of exercise are all three huge problems that we have to address. And low traffic neighbours and active travel are a very, very good solution for those three big problems.
I think.
Can I just come back on that last little bit?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think John's worry is less that traffic will build up; it's that there will be no room for diversions in the event of big roadwork. So Lower Boston Road gets some massive water main burst, it's shut. Everything then has to go a completely different way, as opposed to taking some shortcuts that it might have done previously. So I think that's the danger, and how do we plan for that eventuality, I think, is the question.
But last night temporary traffic light was causing a blockage. If you actually turned around and went back down Boston Road and went across Swincoln to Northfields Avenue and went that way, there was no traffic. Actually, traffic will find a way through. And sometimes, when the police, there was that accident a couple of months ago where the police actually closed Boston Road because it was a serious accident. And in those circumstances, it's going to be difficult. Sometimes you can't escape the fact that when a major incident happens, you're going to have congestion.
Okay.
I think the point is though. Well, so the point is though that
very briefly, John.
Very briefly, 10 or 15 minutes waiting because of some specific problem is one thing, but what's happening is because the alternative routes aren't available either, people are taking an hour to get around these things. That's the difference. It's making an annoying few minutes into a heck of a long time for people because there's just not the availability to go alternative routes.
Great. I've just lost my participant list again. Apologies. Because before we move on to Councillor Costigan, Chris, did you want to just very briefly remind us where that figure came from?
Yes. So sorry for that. Not there. It comes from TfL's London Travel Survey, which is an annual survey that they carry out. The figure quoted in the transport strategy dates back to 2015-16, although of course they carry this out on an annual basis, and the figure has not subsequently changed. So although the source is a little older, the current data backs up exactly the same results.
Thank you, Deirdre. Sorry to keep you waiting.
Thanks, Chair. So I just wanted to ask a little bit more about the ANPR. So I understand that, we're going to replace all of the bollards with ANPR going forward. So how do we actually enforce that? How does that work? So, I know it's automatic number plate recognition, but, are there people involved in that process? Or is it all electronic? So do we have to pay somebody to sit in front of a camera, back at Percival House? Is it all electronic? But what are the costs involved in that, even if it is all electronic and there's no people involved? Because there must be some costs of actually enforcing that ANPR. There will be a revenue cost, won't there, going forward? So I think that the Cabinet report, I think on page 17 and 18, it has got some costings, but they seem to be one-off costs. There must be a revenue cost going forward. And have we kind of factored that in? And I assume, there's, the council will make money from it as well, but have you done a analysis of that, because it is something that will continue going forward. I think we also mention in that bit, still on the ANPR and the finances, we mention in that section that we've managed to cover the cost of the cameras by using the LIP monies and other grants. But presumably they were supposed to be focused on other things. So what are we now not doing because we've had to do this? I think accountants or whatever call it the opportunity cost, don't they? And what have we lost out on because we've had to go down this route of putting in cameras instead? So that's on that. So the other area was just kind of the broader thing, I suppose. I think on page 25 of, I think it's our report rather than the cabinet report, we've got like the aims, and I know Councillor Bell, you sort of outlined them, of what this is supposed to be all about. And, big part of that is climate change and modal shift. But now that we're looking at using ANPR instead, on giving exemptions on people who live on those roads being able to continue down those roads, that seems to kind of undermine those aims to quite a large extent, really. And it's now, I know some residents have said to me when I've been at some of the LTNs that they felt it was now kind of creating a gated community type approach. But it does seem we're focusing much more now on stopping rat running. And it's not so much about modal shift, because we're not asking people who live in those areas to change to active travel. They can still go down their road because of ANPR. So I suppose I wanted to go back to those original aims on page 25 and say, now that all of this has happened over the last few months, and we've discovered what the fire service actually, how they work, and we've discovered how the ambulance service work, would we have done this? Would we have done this differently? Would we have picked these ANPRs? LTNs? Would we have gone forward with it, knowing all of that we know now? And that just leads me on to the final issue, which is, what does that mean for tranche 2? And how can we learn from this for tranche 2? So I'm assuming that we would have had to put in our kind of bid for tranche 2 probably in the summer. Could we not have looked at using Commonplace, for example, to ask people what they thought about those proposals over the last number of months? Because, I'm assuming that we'll suddenly, say after Christmas or whatever, be telling people there's 5 new areas. But could we not have spent the last number of months using Commonplace to ask them what they thought and feed into those proposals, rather than kind of, I guess the public will think we're falling into the same trap a second time, of really not consulting them in advance, when my understanding is we probably could have done that, couldn't we, over the last few months? Thanks.
Thanks, Deirdre. Julian, 4 or 5 more questions there.
Yeah.
That
So
was only
I'll start.
3, seriously.
I'll start with the last one first. So, could we have used the last few months to using Commonplace to consult on the tranche 2 ones? We haven't got, or we hadn't got until very, very recently, confirmation that we got the funding. So I much as I want to do upfront consultation, I don't think we can start to consult until we've got the confirmation that we've got the funding in place. Now that we've got the funding in place, the first place I want to start with is consulting with councillors, but then we would look to do consultation in a much more fuller way with the tranche 2 ones than the tranche 1. So in terms of ANPR exemptions, let me be absolutely clear. We are not exempting residents within LTNs to go through ANPR cameras. The only exemption that we're giving is to blue badge holders who live within that particular LTN. And the reason that we're limiting that exemption to just that relatively small number of blue badge holders within an LTN is because of exactly the point that you make, that you lose the purpose of the LTN and those bigger issues if you start to go beyond that. I think I said earlier that there were 12,000 blue badge holders right across the borough, and you could, you know, and we will consider this when we talk about it on Tuesday next week. You could give all of those blue badge holders, whether they live in an LTN or not, an exemption. But actually, the numbers are such that that would potentially begin to undermine the purpose of LTNs and that big picture need to get modal shift. In terms of the opportunity costs of the camera, that's something I'll ask Chris to come back on. I think we're not quite sure what the costs will be, because although we are very, very clear that the reason that we're doing this is to ensure that there is full access for emergency vehicles, and that that will underscore the safety of all residents within LTNs. It nevertheless will raise some revenue. Unfortunately, people don't follow the rules and they go through the barriers and they will get a ticket. Now, how much of those fines will cover the costs of the cameras? I don't believe there is a significant ongoing revenue cost. Deirdre, I'm very happy to again ask Chris to reply. He may not know because it's the parking people who deal with these things, but my understanding is that all of these kind of back office processes for issuing fines are pretty automated, and certainly, you know, the way that the cameras pick up the cars as they go through and then issue the fines, it's an automated process with some input from current staff who we already have. So I don't think there's if at all, any ongoing revenue cost. And I think that covers it, Chair.
I think there was one just on the aims, so kind of that shift from to rapidly.
Yeah, that was the bit about whether you undermine those aims, those big aims, by giving too many exemptions to go through the cameras. I think that was the context of Deirdre's point about the aims. So I think I answered that one.
Okay, Chris, do you want to pick up on what might not be funded if we're covering the cost of ANPR? The £20,000 per camera, I think, was one figure. Wasn't it?
So yes, I mean, we are expecting initially there could well be some income, as Councillor Bell said, that the people who unfortunately don't obey the rules, you know, there are at the moment people we know that people are doing that, and we expect that will probably cover the cost. But and therefore it's probably likely to be a zero-sum game, if you see what I mean. The income's likely to cover the cost of the cameras. That's how we're expecting. So therefore, in terms of things that might be lost out, we're not actually expecting anything to do that, but it is going to be something that we'll keep review. Because at the end of the day, if people don't go through obey the signs, obey everything that's up there, and everything is standardized, DFT state house signage has to be set up, so drivers should be aware. Everything is there for them to be aware. If they don't go through, then they won't get fined. It's so, you know, it comes down to therefore some enforcement that we expect it will probably cover the cost, and therefore nothing will lose out. In terms of the ongoing revenue cost, I think Councillor Bell's right. It's not exactly my area, but I don't think we're expecting any additional revenue costs because we already have camera enforcement of various other elements of traffic across the borough, and it will just be a continuation using exactly the same systems.
Thanks. Councillor Costigan, you've unmuted.
You caught me, Councillor. Sorry, I just wanted to come back on just one of the points that Councillor Bell made, and I know that you've said that it was difficult to ask people about tranche 2 and use commonplace for that. But could we? I don't know if there's going to be a tranche 3, but could we consider if there ever is a tranche 3 that we kind of turn things on their head a little bit from what we've been doing so far, and we maybe go out and ask the public where they think LTNs might work, rather than us kind of rushing into them and kind of, I guess some residents feel we're telling them rather than listening to them. So would there be a way that going forward we might actually ask residents where they feel an LTN would be helpful, and use commonplace for that or whatever? Rather than, as I say, kind of fall into the trap we seem to be falling into of following these bidding deadlines and, not being able to consult.
I think that's a very good idea, and it may be difficult for some people to understand this, but there are residents out there in the borough who are actually pleading with us to implement a low traffic neighbourhood. So the 10th one in the tranche 1, which is the East Acton Golf Links estate, the Residents Association, on behalf of residents there, are pleading with us to deliver that LTN. And I'm sure that there are other areas of the borough where people would actually want a low traffic neighbourhood. So yeah, we need to have a mechanism where people can feed that through to us.
So I suppose the question is, why was it not possible in the summer, having put through tranche 1? Why was it not possible to have done that before tranche 2, or to, as you said, we haven't confirmed tranche 2 yet. Can we use commonplace before we confirm to say, here's some bids that we have made, which ones do we want to use? Is that what we're doing when you say we're taking a different approach on tranche 2?
So we've already applied for tranche 2. We've had the funding confirmed. We just need to reconfirm to TfL that we're going ahead with the ones that we've received the funding for, and that's where I think at this point, given the sensitivities of all of this, we need to talk to the ward councillors in those wards before we go back to TfL and say yes, we're going ahead with tranche 2. I think once we've done that, then that's when we open up the consultation with the residents.
And I mean, for instance, let's assume some ward councillors say, I don't want to make this decision. Can you consult my residents first? Would we have enough time to do that?
No. So I think there's a looming deadline for confirmation of these schemes that we have had approval on. So yeah, we've literally got days, possibly weeks, and I think we're looking to see if we can get an extension just so that we can have that consultation with the councillors. So yeah, there's a tight deadline, but in terms of the implementation of tranche 2, there is a longer deadline than the first tranche. So we would have to have completed the consultation part of implementation of tranche 2 by the end of this financial year, 31st of March 21. And then we would look to implement, if we haven't already done so in this financial year, in the next financial year. So the government have learnt the lesson that there needs to be more time for consultation. So they've given us that. So I think we'll be able to do what you're asking us to do.
Okay, Councillor Woodruff, sorry, I made you wait a bit longer there.
Thank you, Chair. I've only got one question, although I'm desperately trying to think of another 4 or 5, because that's what we're doing. Swinkham, I seem to recall Hounslow were going to close Swinkham, so that might have been a problem. Julian. What I'm asking about is about the consultation. I gather there's got to be we've got to restart the consultation. Should that happen, do you sort of take into account all the people who've already submitted to that consultation, or does the whole thing start afresh again?
Yeah, so the proposal to give the exemptions for the blue badge holders to go through cameras is regarded as a significant change to the LTN, and that actually resets the ETO 6-month period. And from the moment we make that decision to allow blue badge holders to go through, the ETO is started again. Now, in practical terms, and this is something that we'll talk about at the cabinet meeting next week, it doesn't actually change the timetable of how we will make a final decision at the end of the experimental traffic orders. So under the initial 6 months, we were looking at for example, the Northfields at West Ealing South LTN 21-1. We were looking that 6 months wouldn't have been up until March time, and it would have gone into the period of pre-election, and we wouldn't have been able to consider it as cabinet until after the election was over and out of the way. So the original timetable was that we would probably have received that report as cabinet in order to make a decision on what to do in probably June next year. If we make the decision next Tuesday, we would end up with a new 6 months starting probably early in the new year, when we make the alterations to the orders so that blue badge holders can go through. We would be looking at the 6 month period ending in June, which is when I've said the original one is when we would have been bringing it to cabinet. So my hope is that we could bring it to cabinet in July, August at the latest, and we would have in fact lost only a month or two in terms of what the original timetable was, but we would have made a substantive change to make the low traffic neighbourhood better by giving better access for blue badge holders.
But people have already submitted their response. They're still valid, I think.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't pick up on that. They'll all be included, and that will all be taken into account. Yeah, so it doesn't wipe those out, and all that's come so far, all the feedback we've had will still be part of the final decision.
Great, thank you, Councillor Donnelly.
Thank you, Chair. Two quick points. One's about benchmarking. Julian earlier referred to I couldn't unmute as a catchphrase of 2020. Another of the catchphrases has been the new normal. And I think one of the problems we've had, and it's affected this exercise in a way it's affected some of the other things, is how we're defining normal anymore and projecting forward. So in a sense, for benchmarking, which was something that was referred to, I think, earlier on, it's not so much for me in my mind about working out what we're benchmarking from, but also what we're benchmarking to. What's the state of the world that we're assuming will be an ongoing one that we can then measure and say, well, we're now X% or not better than we were before. The other side is about more about the consultation thing. Some people analogies with CPZs and the way in which we dealt with them in the past. I can remember going back 20 years when they first were coming in. I never encountered a CPZ that didn't get hostility when it was first mooted, and I've never encountered a CPZ that anybody asked to be removed once it was in. So the analogy in terms of immediate perceptions of popularity are valid, but this is a hell of a lot more complicated because it touches a lot more aspects of people's lives. But and in terms of timing, I think what most parties come to view on is that support for LTNs tends to be back end loaded. I think Mark in his contribution was saying, he began with skepticism, and his support built through observation. Now, extrapolating that away from what happens within a single zone, surely the greatest hope for moving forward to build a consensus around a tier 2, 3, whatever it might be, is by demonstrating that earlier zones have been successful in operation, not just during their ETO, not just during a sort of what's proved an unexpectedly fierce conflict between proponents and opponents. And can we not think to find ways to, if we can demonstrate success, that's the point at which we go to other people and say, we want to give you now what those people have got and are happy with. Sorry if that was longer than I promised.
That's right. Julian, benchmarking then and consultation / CPZs.
Yeah, and I'll take the last one first, because again, if you talk to colleagues in Waltham Forest, demonstrate that success that you've talked about, Steve, and therefore they've had a less difficult phase of implementing further LTNs in this COVID period with this streets-based funding, and so clearly being able to do that is critical, and I think that's part of the reason why LTNs are experimental, and you can make them better as you go on as well. I guess that hopefully explains some of the support being backloaded, because it's been a dynamic process, and we've improved things as we've gone through the process, and I hope that people can see that when that we see, if we make that decision next week about cameras for bollards for the emergency services and the blue badges, that will increase some of that support and ensure that a lot of people's concerns are addressed and taken away. In terms of the benchmarking going forward, although we very much hope that COVID is going to go away, and we hope that all of those initial reasons for bringing in low traffic neighbourhoods to tackle the problem of lack of capacity on public transport, I'm longing for the day where I'm packed like a sardine on a tube train again, because it will mean that COVID has gone, and it will be a happy day when we're all crushed on the tube again. But some of those bigger issues are still going to be there. The climate emergency is still going to be there. The air quality problems are still going to be there. The obesity crisis is still going to be there. and therefore it's kind of benchmarking our performance against those long-term challenges that we're facing that I think we need to look at. Hopefully that addresses your question, Steve, or your comments.
Thank
Steve.
you.
Oh yes, it does. Fine. But I think it ties into the question about criteria for success. Some of the Scoot data in the report, in the cabinet report, is very interesting, but it's Scoot data on junctions around the LTNs, which is important, but it doesn't show us what it looks like compared to junctions well outside of the LTNs and what's happening elsewhere in the borough. So, the cabinet report can't tell us whether this increased level of congestion at the Lower Boston Road is only happening at Lower Boston Road because of the LTN. And I think we can say that it's because of the LTN, because traffic is being redirected. But the report doesn't tell us that actually other junctions are having even worse congestion because they haven't got an LTN nearby, and that therefore we can say the LTN is fairly successful. So how are we benchmarking the ongoing performance as opposed to just, because I know there's an issue with baseline data which we don't necessarily have, how are we benchmarking performance of LTN areas against the borough's performance as a whole, and being able to demonstrate actually they are successful. I would love to be able to have data that says these are working as planned, they are great.
And then that's a really, really important point, Chair. I know that both the DFT and TfL are collecting data in areas that don't have LTNs to do to kind of compare and be able to have that kind of benchmarking with non-LTN areas. So, and that's something that we need to address in our final report when we get to the end of the 6 months as well. So really good, really good point.
Thanks. Councillor Shaw.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Going right back to the beginning and design of the schemes, I just see at the beginning of section 4, the identification of the schemes. It's mentioned in the report that, suggestions from councillors and the public's views were considered. So first of all, I was just wondering, how many councillors contributed to that? And who was it, and how many public views were actually sought there? And this links into what Lorna was saying from One Ealing, really, is that she raises the issue of other groups being consulted with, and so again, who were these other groups, and how many schemes did they actually put forward that then subsequently went on to the long list of there? Because that's this is still all a little unclear, I think it's fair to say. To go back and reeling back to Councillor Donnelly's point there, on the CPZs and introduction of CPZs, in terms of pre-consultation, with CPZs, what we've done is simply asked people within the area, and said, right, here we are, there's a 4-week or 6-week consultation, documents are available, they've been posted out in the past, now we'll be able to do it online, please respond and say whether or not you're in favour of this scheme. Here's the picture of the scheme. And if so, what the statistics, would look like. There's a simple yes or no. Yes, the majority of people that want this scheme to go ahead, it's over 50%. Does it need to be a clear majority of more than sort of 55%? The worst case scenarios in the CPZ schemes, and I know that I certainly had one to deal with, that it was very marginal. It was a sort of 52-48, and you sort of, it's not really clear for people what they want. But is that a style of consultation that we could adopt and use? And if not, then why wouldn't it be such a good idea if officers could perhaps respond to that for me as well, please?
Thanks, Gareth.
Okay, so in terms of who made the contributions, so I certainly know that, and Chris would have to come in and say who specifically, but I do know that councillors did put in suggestions, and there were quite a number from all parties as well put in suggestions. I'm also aware that the Ealing Cycle Campaign put in suggestions. That they are always very proactive and very aware of. They didn't need us to tell them that this was happening. They're plugged into what TfL and DFT are saying, and so they were responding given their proactivity on these things. And again, I'm sure Chris can perhaps tell us of other groups as well that came forward. In terms of should we adopt a CPZ decision-making process? I think in some respects, I've already addressed this in terms of Councillor Dubrovska's points, and by saying that it's a complex picture, far more significant than the implementation of a CPZ. So I think a straight kind of yes/no plebiscite is not the way to do this. There are big issues that we're dealing with, which I don't need to repeat, but obesity crisis, climate crisis, and air quality crisis. But Chris, did you want to add to that?
So I was just going to say, I think just to be clear, is that when the announcement was made by DFT, a number of groups, and Ealing Cycle Campaign is one of them, Make Uxbridge Road Safe, I can certainly remember off the top of my head, both came to us with suggestions. We did not go out to them and canvass them. So we did not go out for a consultation with certain groups. They came to us with their suggestions, because I think, as Councillor Bell says, they are quite clued up and keep abreast of certain things. I can't recall the number of councillors off the top of my head. I think I might have saved some of the emails. I'd have to go back to my archive, because we are talking back into like May and June here. So I will try and see if I have saved all of those emails and be able to perhaps add that as a note to the record of the meeting.
Thanks, Chris. So I think the other, sorry, Gareth, did you?
Yeah, sorry, yes, if I could just come back there, and again, to go back to Julian, that's about the holistic and the bigger picture approach. I completely take this, and I think, lots of residents do. I think one of the real questions here is, just like with CPZs, at the moment there's a real feel that what we're doing is just displacing traffic from one area to the next, and that the overall picture isn't particularly being pieced together perhaps as it should be. That we're moving traffic from one area and putting it down at, whether it's the junction of Boston Manor, whether it's the junction at the Lido junction on the Uxbridge Road. And so it's, where the next pieces are, and how do we displace that next traffic movement before or even while we're actually waiting for the traffic evaporation that we're looking to, or hoping that will happen through the introduction of these schemes.
Julian, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, well, and I think it picks up on your point earlier, Josh, where you were talking about the need to look at the traffic levels in areas that don't have LTNs, and I think that is critical. And again, if you look at the appendices that are in next week's cabinet report with the interim assessments, as I said at the beginning, it's still too early to tell, and we need to do more work to see what is exactly happening. And also, these things do take a period of time before there are kind of long-term changes to people's behaviour, and yeah, I'm still pretty confident that there will be some mode shift, and that there will be absolutely reductions in traffic within LTNs. That's clearer now, but we don't have the traffic surveys within them. It's only anecdotal, but we need to get that, and we'll see that at the end of the trial. And we'll have to look at those boundary roads as well. But at the moment, if you look at the details in the cabinet appendices, the kind of jury's still out, as I've said before, and where there are issues around Lower Boston Road and the viaduct junction, there are mitigations that we can put in place. So, we are looking to see if we can change the traffic light timings so that some of those issues can be addressed, and there may be some options around removing some parking bays along there as well, in order to allow emergency vehicles to get through in a more speedy way. So, where we see problems, as we go along, hopefully we can find some solutions as well.
Thanks.
Sorry, Chair, if I could just very briefly, if you'll indulge me, thank you. Yes, and just sorry to come back again, Julian, but just thinking of the evidence that we're looking for, I'm just wondering how sensible we think it is going ahead with further tranches of this, when we're still really needing to find the evidence base in the first place for what's happening in some areas before we start moving on for the others.
Julian.
Yeah, well, there is evidence in other places that this has worked, and I think that's you've got a problem, and you can either say, well, I'm not going to do anything about the problem, we'll just carry on as we are, and we'll not do anything, or you can say, we can put these LTNs in, and in numerous cities across the world they've worked, and closer to home in Waltham Forest they've worked. We're still kind of waiting to see how they've panned out and how big the dividend will be in Ealing, but I don't think that should stop us, Gareth.
Thanks, Julian. Lorna, I see you've got your hand up. You have had a chance to speak already, and a couple of councillors haven't yet had a chance to ask questions. So we're going to go to them first, and if we have time at the end, I can come back to you and give Mark an opportunity to follow up as well. So Councillor Rooney.
Thank you, Chair. Just a follow-up to Councillor Bell's response on blue badge holders. Please could you clarify if vehicles linked to blue badge holders, such as carers, will be able to travel in and out of the LTN? And also, if not, is it something we could look into implementing? And just another quick question. So the LTNs are a really efficient way for local authorities to lower air and noise pollution. Please could you explain how pollution levels on boundary roads will be monitored and assessed as part of the consultation process? Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. So the blue badge point, I'm aware of the kind of individual case that has prompted your question, and I think my answer is that we'd have to look into that, because essentially I think we're probably saying that the car that the blue badge holder designates is a relative's car in another LTN, and they would then have to travel into another LTN where the blue badge holder would be. Yeah, I think in those kind of instances, we'd have to look at them on an individual basis and make a decision. In terms of monitoring the pollution, air quality levels on the boundary roads, we do have some long-term air quality monitoring stations right across the borough. There's a whole network of them, and some of them, I think there's only a couple, are right next to LTNs, so and on the boundary roads. So what I understand, and Chris can come in and add to this, is that we have looked to put in some additional diffusion tubes both within LTNs and on the boundaries of LTNs, so that we can get some more data. The other point to make is that congestion data is also a proxy for poor air quality as well. Now, clearly, air quality monitoring data is much better than using congestion as a proxy for it. But I don't know if you want to add to that, Chris.
No, you've pretty much covered it. I would just say that the diffusion tubes are within LTNs, not on the boundary roads. There are, I don't know the number again off the top of my head, but there are at least half a dozen permanent air quality sites on the boundary roads, and they certainly are next to all of the larger ones, including the one in Councillor Rooney's constituent ward.
Thank you.
So I think the question I have about the blue badge is that there's a question for when someone changes the vehicle, or they're in a vehicle 3 days a week, and they have another carer who comes in another day a week, for instance, and takes them somewhere. In that instance, they can only register one vehicle with the council. Can they retroactively apply to have their permits, their fines cancelled if they're going through what they could ordinarily go through? Or would, if they're using a different vehicle once a week to the one they normally use, have to take the long way around? Because I think that's the practical point people are trying to understand about this proposal. Do we know that yet?
I don't think we do, and I think we are going to look to other boroughs that have already implemented schemes like this to see what practical kind of measures and decision-making processes they've put in place. But it's never going to be perfect. We know that, but that's the problem, in that the blue badge is associated with a person rather than a vehicle, and that's not going to change. So it's how we can find a practical way forward, given that given.
Okay, Councillor Driscoll.
Thank you, Chair. Just to go through a few points. I mean, I think Councillor Ball, his idea about contingency planning, I think that's really important. So if we do have accidents or unforeseen, if the borough can clear a tree that's fallen across a main road on a Sunday afternoon in 2.5 hours with 3 agencies involved, it should be within our remit to do something contingency planning on boundary roads. I think that's really important that we have done. The fact that we're introducing cameras, the one thing about the bollards, there's clarity there. You can't pass a car through, but with there'll be less clarity in a way without a bollard. For obvious reasons, but just in terms of safety and road markings and awareness, because you'll have cyclists and potential vehicles with legitimate reason, and also vehicles taking a chance and going through. But I think we need to be aware how we are going to warn or manage that, or put advanced warning, road markings, whatever we do. However, because there's complaints about the diagonals filters at present, I would assume if there's a diagonal filter, you approach from both sides with caution at slow speeds, but that's often been raised as an issue. And I mean, I've had lots of correspondence both against the LTNs for a wide range of reasons, whether somebody's disabled, whether somebody's elderly, or they've got medical concerns or other issues. I've also had emails of supportive, equally because somebody's old, somebody's got medical issues, or somebody has now have a life experience that they didn't have before and feel more secure. So I've had emails from both sides. One of the things I want to clarify also, there's about 30,000 on cost of vandalism. I mean, people talked about an opportunity cost with all these expensive cameras. There could be a potential for an income there that we don't really want. We don't want to fine people, but there's 30,000 spent on vandalism. But what's the opportunity cost of that? What are we not doing because we spent 30,000, or the last count it was 30,000, which is significant. And a few people have mentioned Lorna's letter, which I received as well. Just to reference, there was a statement in there that the Labour councillors in Northfields Ward said that we weren't consulted. Can I absolutely clarify that and to say that we were consulted? We did have emails, as all the Northfield Ward members were sent by transport, various details, draft plans, initial plans. So I can just want to clarify and put that on the record that we were all consulted across whichever political party you were within the Northfield Ward. So there's no confusion with that. And my final sort of consideration is about the plea to have about the tone of debate in the public, which I think the council has got part of it to blame there. We were slow in getting information out. We were slow in supplementary information to get in a leaflet to get more information. People were confused about road layouts. Although households had letters, still we could have been more proactive in getting information there. And I think part of that fed into concerns and anxieties and not understanding what was going on. Also, one Ealing circulating a leaflet saying there's 29 traffic schemes. Now, tonight we've heard from Julian about 5 LTNs. I know in the Northfield Ward, I can think of 6 traffic schemes, 2 new zebra crossings, 2 new raised tables for traffic calming on roads, a marking outside a school, and an upgrade to a controlled crossing. All of those are traffic schemes. But I think if we just talk about a traffic scheme and think every single one of those is going to be an LTN, I think that also adds to the level of heightened discussion and anxiety. So I think there's a need for clarity about what people say and when they say it, and that's really important, because otherwise it's not a positive discussion. So I hope we can have some responses to those thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Julian.
Yeah, so fully take your point about contingency planning for if there's an accident on a main boundary road. So I think that officers would agree with that, and we need to do that. In terms of making sure that we get proper signage and warnings, so that we reduce any danger, particularly for cyclists going through barriers with vehicles now going through, albeit a small number. Absolutely right about the opportunity cost of the 30k of vandalism of bollards. That again contributed to the recommendation that's coming to Cabinet next week about replacing bollards with cameras. The primary reason was obviously safety and access for emergency vehicles, but the sheer cost of replacing bollards and the amount of vandalism played a part in it as well. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more about the tone of the debate. I'm a kind of seasoned politician, and I've got experience of robust debate, but I think there have been times when this has gone well beyond that, and I think that we need to make sure that, as you say, that there's a respectful conversation amongst everybody, and also that there's effort on the part of all concerned to have clarity and facts. I want to make an evidence-based decision on this, and that's why we welcome people's input and evidence, so that we can make a rational assessment of this at the end of the 6 months.
Thanks, Julian. Just for members' benefit, I've been jotting down a few things as we've been going along that people have said that I think are probably forming the basis of some recommendations we can make coming out of this meeting. The contingency planning, I think, is one of them. I always like to make a recommendation that's already been accepted in the meeting, because then we can show that we've had some value already. But I think that's certainly one that we need to make as a committee and kind of have evidence back that it is happening. There is one around the point about benchmark data for the rest of the borough, so we can look at relative performance. Councillor Costigan's suggestion about kind of using Commonplace more widely to gather proactive feedback for when in wave 56 of the pandemic, when the government still hasn't managed to roll out the vaccine properly, and we're on tranche 7 of funding, we can say these are schemes putting forward that residents have asked for. And there's also one then around clarifying blue badge exemptions and how that process will work, because there are still questions remaining. So if members can also just think about anything they want to add to that list, or challenge on that list. This is a democratic committee as much as I'm in charge of it, and I will tell you what I'm doing. Then please do spend a little while just thinking about it. I do have Joanna has waited very, very patiently to follow something up from earlier. Councillor Anand, I've seen, sorry, your hand came up. I don't know if you wanted to come back on something.
No, Chair, legacy hand.
Oh, fantastic. So Joanna, was it something that you wanted to, I can't remember what it was you were following up on.
Yeah, I've got a few follow-up. Actually, Councillor Nan just put something in the chat, and one of my sort of follow-up was sort of on that. The diagonal planters or diagonal LTN sort of layout, does that fulfill the highways, Bible of being compliant for accessibility? Because, for example, driving on pavements is not necessarily good practice. Of course, in emergency, you'll get to the point, to destination, how you get there, but they should be designed in such a way. The whole point of consultation of emergency services is that it's compliant from day one. So my question is to the officers, as well as Councillor Bell, are they compliant at the moment? Another question to follow up on the blue badges. Councillor Bell said, but for example, assigning one vehicle, to a blue badge user. Now, if that was the case and people assigned their, for example, I'm going to give an example. I mean, if my parents decide to use my car as a designated vehicle, effectively, it would mean that people may abuse that position with no check. I mean, I started with council officers years ago, the anti-blue badge abuse team, the initiative within the council. And so this, even though Councillor Bell says it has been successful in other councils, the question is what level of abuse carries on of who have been designated. I might, for example, pick up my parents once a day, but I might use that LTN exit and entry all day, for example, for my pleasure, for example. So there's a level of abuse there. And also, may I ask on more sort of technical, Chris Cole mentioned that he may have deleted some emails with regards to conversations. Can Councillor Bell confirm that any conversation, say since March, on LTNs or other active travel schemes that are currently being subject to legal proceedings, have any emails been deleted, i.e. have emails been saved? Because I believe, I can't quote you which legislation, but have emails been, and any correspondence, not just emails, not electronic, have been retained for the legal proceedings? Thank you.
So on that last point, Joanna, I'm certainly not aware of any emails being deleted. I have to say there are more efficient people than me who kind of regularly kind of clear their inbox and do delete emails for kind of administrative efficiency. I'm not one of those people. My emails just kind of build up. I don't have time to delete them and move them around. So certainly I'm not aware of anything like that. In terms of the abuse of blue badges that are assigned, that is potentially an issue. We have said that we want to give this exemption to blue badge holders. We've seen that other boroughs have done it by designating a single car. I guess we'll look at all potential solutions, and we'll also look at the potential problem of abuse as well, and see if we can come up with the best possible solution that maximizes the opportunity for blue badge holders to make use of this exemption, but also minimize the abuse that might be. Now, an AMPR camera only recognizes the number plate. It doesn't tell you who's in the car. So there it is an issue. And what was your first point again? I can't remember the first. I didn't write it down.
It was about the are the corner planter setups actually legal from day one, not subject to loud movement?
Yeah. So we did an audit, a safety audit, early on with the emergency services of the barriers, and I certainly in those early weeks was I had conversations with the senior fire brigade commanders about the angled barriers with the bollards in, and with the length of the fire trucks, they said to me it's tricky, but it's not impossible, because they have to swing out before they go through, so that they can go through them square, and then they have to swing back again to carry their journey on. Now we've looked at some of the barriers, and I believe that we've moved some. We've made some minor changes in terms of parking bays, in order to be able to allow the fire trucks to make those kind of swinging maneuvers in order to come through the barriers centered. And I'm not aware of any problems, and certainly in my conversations with the fire brigade at the beginning, they were all okay with everything. So I don't know if you want to add to that, Chris or Tony.
It'll probably be Tony rather than myself, because he was the person who dealt with that.
Tony, did you want to add anything? You are still muted, so I'll give you a few seconds just to get the mute button or move on. Tony, you have unmuted but are saying nothing. Okay, we will move on. So I think I've got a few councillors who are probably keen to come in with ideas for recommendations as suggested. I know Lorna has very patiently waited just to say something additionally. Mark, I'll give you the opportunity as well to say something brief as well. Lorna, if you keep, it is now quarter to 10, and apologies for making you all and anyone watching waiting so long. But bearing in mind the time, if you would be brief in any follow-up you have now, please.
Okay, I'd just like to come in on the Waltham Forest point that's been made a few times. The actual size of it is 0.66 square kilometres, so let's say 0.7 kilometres squared. LTN 21 is 1.7 kilometres squared, so it's nearly 3 times the size of it. Now, according to Sustran, a report, often quoted by our own council, LTN should be only between 1 and 1.5 kilometres in terms of size. If Swinkham closes to traffic, LTN 21 could potentially become nearly 2 kilometres squared in terms of size. That seems enormous. So when we're comparing like for like, I really don't think it is alike. Potentially if L21 was reduced to the size of, say, from the Uxbridge Road to, say, Leighton Road, that would be about 0.7 of a kilometre squared, and that would be comparable. So that's the first thing I just wanted to note. The second thing was I've heard Julian speak of evidence-based decisions on this, but I know I'm wanting to get to that, which is obviously what we would all like. Without the baseline data, which I know, Councillor Blacker, you have taken note of, we cannot have an evidence-based decision on this. And I suppose my final thing is just, I think it's really disappointing to hear Councillor Bell saying that he doesn't trust the people of Ealing with big issues and decisions, as is clearly stated. Once again, we're ploughing on ahead with 5 new LTNs, I'm hearing this evening, without any consultation. Because of funding, timing and pressures. We now have also learned this evening that there's a 6-month trial. Well, that's not really the case. It's actually 12 months as a minimum. So we can stop with the pretense of this being a short-term trial, because that's been dispelled this evening, which is really disappointing for us to learn in such a way. We've heard time and time again that the opposition will disappear, but unfortunately, the news tonight I want to get across is that it won't. And with each LTM being implemented without consultation, it will grow. And that's my final point.
Great, thank you, Lorna. I mean, I think we should pick up that Julian did stress that any second tranche would have public consultation before implementation. So I think the point was that ward councillors would be consulted prior to moving ahead and then prior to implementation. But I think,
it was the quote on the evidence-based decision on this being this LTNs.
Yeah.
And we can't get to that without baseline data, because it's not evidence without it.
Thanks. Mark, was there anything you want to say in summary from your point of view?
Yes, I'll keep it short and keep it positive. I'm really glad that the council and Julian in particular recognised a couple of things. Firstly, the idea of blue badge holders getting NPR access. I'm one of the most ardent supporters of this project, but even I recognise that it's not perfect. It needs to be tweaked and altered for the people who are going to be disadvantaged here, but they're a vast minority. I'd also like to thank the council for recognising some of these broader and bigger issues, the big stakes, which are so much more important. We are in the middle of a climate emergency, an obesity epidemic and an air pollution crisis. And those issues are too big to be dealt with by a referendum or simply listening to the volume of anger against these little schemes. Okay, it's a golden opportunity. Let's seize it now. Because if it's not this, then what is it? If it's not now, then when is it? Let's ignore the collective hysteria that's descended on parts of this borough and let's get this done. Because frankly, the debate has been unedifying. It has been horrible at times, both ourselves in this family on the street, but you particularly as councillors. I really do commend you for keeping your nerve. Let's see it through. And as I say, at the end of the day, people will see this as being the right thing for this neighbourhood and the right thing to be on the right side of history.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Councillor Ball.
Yes, so I'd like to suggest a couple of recommendations relating to the point about the additional new LTNs that are being proposed. Firstly, I mean, the fundamental thing is I think we as a committee ought to express concern that that the administration are pushing ahead with additional LTNs when it's far from clear whether the additional LTNs are actually a net positive benefit or not for the borough. So I think that's kind of the fundamental point. And then the other point, which is probably hopefully no one will disagree with, is that one of the problems that's plagued this discussion is the lack of baseline data. So if if the administration does go ahead with new LTNs, can we recommend that they get baseline data for those the streets within those LTNs now, so that there's proper comparable information? Because at the moment, you know, we are reduced to kind of anecdotal views in both directions about whether traffic is increased or decreased. I mean, you know, the comments that we hear a lot from Councillor Bell about how important it is to save the planet by decreasing car use, but it's not at all clear whether overall in these schemes car use is being decreased by modal shift, or whether it's increased by people still driving but driving a longer way. So that I think that baseline data is crucial.
Okay, and Julian, you wanted to come back on that baseline data point briefly?
Yeah, again, I'd recommend if people haven't read the interim assessment cabinet report and all the appendices, you will see that there is baseline data. There's baseline data that existed pre-COVID. There's the COVID pre-LTN implementation data, and then there's the LTN implementation data. So there is data. There'll be more data when we get to the final assessment. We've only got so much of it available at the moment, but when we come to the final assessment, there is baseline data, and yeah, it's incorrect to say that there is.
Yeah, I mean, I think possibly the point is in terms of, I mean, looking at the summary of monitoring data table that you mentioned, yes, there's certainly baseline data for main boundary road traffic. There's only some for the internal. So I think where new LTNs are proposed, we can gather during the kind of the pre-implementation phase, we can gather internal road traffic data and get possibly get diffusion tubes in there as well, so that we can get that air quality data that, again, the report says that we don't have baseline internal road air quality data. So it's just that extra baseline data. I think we recognise there is some, but it's getting that full picture. I've now lost my chat again, apologies. Councillor Shaw, I think, was next.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think just thinking about the discussion there, just about how this discourse has gone over the LTNs. I mean, undoubtedly, it's got extremely emotive, to say the least. You know, I can't make more of an understatement, I don't think, than that. You know, there's hostility, you know, from both sides. You know, both sides seem to have entrenched somewhat. And I think, you know, what we are looking for is, you know, evidence-based decisions, which is something that Julian has sort of made clear, that, you know, a rational decision has to be taken here. We've got our eyes on a bigger picture. And I think sometimes that this bigger picture and the environmental picture, you know, is a longer and larger scheme than a political life. And so in many ways, this is where sort of politics falls down, with relative short-term thinking rather than sort of longer-term decisions being made. However, that said, you know, I think that when you speak to residents from both sides, there's actually a lot more that they agree on than they disagree on, although they may disagree fundamentally on some very important points. You know, there is a lot of agreement on that. Everybody who's written to me about not liking or you know, being opposed to the LTN schemes have all recognised and said, yes, actually, we recognise that we need less vehicle movements. People need to come out of their cars. It's just the way it's being done that's being a particular problem. And it's almost the implementation of it that has got a lot of people's backs against the wall, if you like, and has pushed them into a position of being so opposed. So I think it's crucial that we get this right. And, you know, especially after the experience we've had of this, you know, first, you know, pretty disastrous attempts, if you like, at implementing the schemes. We get it right if we are going to attempt further tranches. And given that, I think that the flexibility needs to be welcomed of these schemes, and the willingness to change them needs to be welcomed, so that we can come to a point where it meets the needs of residents as well. And with that in mind, I sort of think that we need to consider and really put a recommendation forward that, substantial revisions to the schemes or their complete removal altogether has to remain on the table and need to be considered as one of the options.
Thanks. And Councillor Costigan.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask if we could also add as a recommendation just the point around the finances of these changes, because I just think it wasn't that clear what they were. So I really think in the interest of transparency and so that we can show people that we're actually making these decisions with all of the information at our fingertips, that actually that the Cabinet would actually look at what the finances is around this, and that is the cost, including capital and revenue of ANPR, and so revenue that might come in as well, and also the opportunity cost, what we might miss out. And just to add as well, I think I would support what Councillor Shaw has just put forward too as a recommendation. I think it's really important that we do, everything is left on the table in the interest of people feeling that we are taking seriously the points that residents have raised, and that, we do want these to work, but we have to have that flexibility where, if one doesn't work, then we still have that potential to be able to remove it. Thanks.
And Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at it and just bearing in mind, if we are going to consider maybe even consider the possibility of perhaps abandoning the LTNs, depending on how this whole thing works out. We are talking about consultation with our residents. Is it really worthwhile just consulting with them and finding other ideas from them as to how we can get over these issues of pollution and the fact that we do need to change our modes of transport? Maybe it's a good idea to actually work together with residents, finding those alternatives that the residents actually have themselves, that they want to come forward with. And certainly harness the energy of the campaign groups to see if they can actually work within their neighbourhoods and change people's behaviour that way. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's something that Councillor Driscoll, who is up next, will be considering in his climate emergency scrutiny panel. Paul.
Absolutely. Thank you, Josh. Yeah, I think the idea about we're recommending that they can be substantially changed or removed is always on the table and has always been part of the consideration. So that recommendation is fine to go ahead, but I also think it's always been there. So we're recommending something that exists as we stand. And Councillor Rice, I agree with your point about getting residents to come in with their own thoughts and contributions and ideas and suggestions, and that's always theirs. That's definitely there as part of the consultation. But it'd be helpful to ask officers to give us feedback on the new government quango about active travel, because part of that quango, forgive me if I get the name wrong, is it Active England or Active Travel? Forgive me for getting the name wrong here now, but part of that will be to assess our performance in how well we are doing with active travel. So how are we going to be judged and assessed with that, and how are we going to meet that criteria? Because that will also determine our future funding in other actions. So there's a national picture that we've also got to understand how that will go play out as well. So understanding that as well. So getting officers' feedback from that would be helpful.
Great, thank you. There are no more hands up. We've heard a few recommendations. I know some of them are, as Paul you rightly pointed out, I don't think the option of taking things out has ever been off the table. But I think it's probably important, as Councillor Shaw says, that we reiterate that and recommend that we are very clear that as a council we are prepared to listen and take that step of doing that and reinforce that. Given there's no other hands up, am I to understand that everyone is happy with what has been mentioned? Has anyone got any problems with any of the recommendations that have been suggested that we put forward? Bearing in mind, we won't have the luxury, given the Cabinet meeting on Tuesday, of bringing them back in the minutes and agreeing them formally to then send on. that I will summarise our recommendations and send, I assume, to Julian as chair of cabinet for cabinet's consideration alongside its report. So if people do have any problems with what's been said, please do say now before I formally tell Julian, although he is in the room with us, what we have said.
So I'm happy with all the recommendations as they stand currently.
Fantastic.
Agreed, Chair. Thank you.
Agreed.
Julian, you've moved forward as if to say something.
Yeah, you predicted correctly. I was going to welcome you to come to cabinet if you want to present the recommendations to us. That I think would be the right way to do it.
Great. I think I'm coming anyway for our summary of the OSC's scrutiny on the COVID response. So I'm there anyway. I'm happy to speak on that point. That brings us then to the end of the LTN section of the agenda. Can I just thank Lorna and Mark again for coming and spending your evenings on Zoom. It is our job to be here, it's not yours. So thank you very much for giving up your time.
Thank you for having us.
And again, thank you for your feedback generally, and everyone who's kind of tuned in this evening and sent through comments to us on this subject. We do have, I think, one more item of business. I've now lost my agenda front sheet because I have the cabinet agenda open in front of me. So if you bear with me, I think we just have the work programme. Thank you. Which was to note our meeting in January is call-in only, as per our previous discussions. And then do we need to look, we need to look at recommendations from the other panels. So if we do the OSC work programme first, if I have recommendations from other panels, I'm using one single document, which is not helpful, and I apologise. So we have February budget scrutiny, and bringing forward, we'd mentioned some time ago, and it was a suggestion from Councillor Taylor, I believe, to look at workplace equalities and kind of representation at various levels of the council. That's scheduled for February alongside budget. March, again, call in only. We have the crime and disorder panel at the end of March, that statutory meeting. And then we also have a suggestion that in April, if PERDA allows, we look at governance arrangements and scrutiny arrangements of some of the council's kind of spun out companies, so Broadway Living, for instance. Are there any comments on that, or can we move on to, I think, Sam?
Yeah, I'm happy to agree, those.
Oh, wonderful.
Chair, my only comment is that the suggested item for April, it's looking very, very likely to move to later on. But I thought it was best to leave it on there as it was, just as a marker, really, just so that obviously aware that there are discussions going on about taking that item, and it's due to the likely politically contentious nature of that, due to everything that's happened at Croydon. I think it's best that it will take place after the elections. But as I say, just a marker really for OSC to be aware of, that discussions are going on, to take an item on that.
Great. I'm not suggesting now that we look through the 18-19 panels progress. It is 4 minutes past 10, so I apologise for that. The one thing we do need to do is look at the recommendations from Scrutiny Panel 3, because that's kind of a more of a rapid response panel looking at various issues that don't necessarily need to wait a whole year. Are we happy to agree their recommendations now? And if so, are we happy to, I'm not sure whether the meeting cycle allows us to meet kind of this soon after their meetings every time. Are we happy for any recommendations coming out of that to be fed through the usual channels more quickly? And if it's out of the meeting cycle, for it to be signed off by myself as chair in consultation with Joanna?
Yeah, very happy with that, Chair.
Agreed, Chair.
Agreed.
Agreed, Chair.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
If I may make a comment, Councillor Blacker?
Joanna, yes.
Yeah, because in the report, it's in point 1.5, we're looking at, I mean, apart from the recommendations themselves in the context of the subject, but in 1.5 is the way it is going to be presented, and the process of how, because it's, I want to say unique style of scrutiny, but it's a different style of scrutiny that's we're used to in Ealing. So the question is, are people happy in the option 2 of how these recommendations will be dealt with?
Sorry, I assumed option 2 involved me somehow. It apparently doesn't.
No, it's if the panel are happy with or have any comments on any of those 3 options other than the recommendations themselves, because it's actually just saying, you know, the document saying that option 2 has is recommended. So if anybody in the panel has any comments on that process itself, rather than just the content of the recommendations.
Yeah, so essentially what I said, except I'm not consulted as chair of OSC, which the fewer emails in my inbox, the better, I suppose.
If you'd like to be consulted in it, I'm sure we can add that into the proposal and get that agreed if that's what you'd prefer, Chair.
I agree even stronger than I did 5 minutes ago, Chair.
Something proposed from the floor that the chair be involved. Fine.
And myself as chair of the panel.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Great. We'll do that then. A slightly modified option 2, and then with that, I think we can draw ourselves to a close. And wish you all. Thank you all very much, actually, for a very long meeting. And as some have said, this debate has been quite contentious, but so thank you all for being very respectful and considerate of the way in which you've conducted yourselves this evening. So thank you very much. Stay safe, and I will hopefully see you all again in tier 1 at some point. And remember to get your vaccinations in January.
Thank you, Chair.